Hey friends! Glad you're here at Harryverse X. We've cooked up something special. Harry absorbed all Horcruxes at age 1 and Voldemort's 7 soul fragments made him Dark Lord God. Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Consumed the Letter came on a Tuesday. Not that Harry needed it. He'd known it was coming for 3 years, had felt the date approaching the way you feel a storm before the clouds arrive, that particular pressure behind the eyes, that low hum in the chest. He'd been marking days on the inside cover of a library book he wasn't supposed to have, a battered copy of Advanced Arithmancy, theoretical frameworks that he'd found wedged behind the water heater in the cupboard under the stairs. Someone had hidden it there. Harry had read it 4 times. He was sitting on the kitchen counter eating toast when the owl arrived. It crashed through the window, not because owls generally crash through windows, but because Vernon Desley had painted all the windows shut 3 summers ago after a neighborhood child broke one with a cricket ball, and the owl, a tawny barn bird with an air of professional grievance, was not in the habit of being stopped by painted wood. Glass went everywhere. Petunia screamed. Dudley fell off his chair. Harry caught the letter before it hit the floor. "Good morning," he said to the owl, who ruffled its feathers at him and accepted a corner of toast with dignified restraint. The envelope was thick cream parchment. His name was written in emerald ink in a hand that looped and curled with the particular flair of someone who had been writing formal correspondence for a very long time. Mr. H. Potter, The Cupboard Under the Stairs, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. He opened it. "Read it." Set it down on the counter beside his plate. Vernon was on his feet now, face cycling through its usual colors, pink, red, the deep arterial purple that meant he was about to say something he'd been rehearsing since approximately 1981. "Now you just listen here, boy, I'll need £30 for the train to London," Harry said. "I can take the bus to the station. You won't need to do anything." "You are not going to any Hogwarts," Harry said. "School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." "Yes. I am." He looked at Vernon with the patient expression of someone who has already run this conversation in his head and found it very short. "You've known about this since before I could walk, Uncle Vernon. You've been dreading it since before I could talk. And now it's here, and I'm going, and the only interesting question is whether you'd like to make this morning unpleasant or not." The purple deepened. Petunia made a sound like a kettle. £30, Harry said again, mildly. "And I'll be out of your hair until summer." He got 35. Vernon threw the extra fiver because his hand was shaking and he miscounted. Harry tucked it into his pocket, thanked the owl, and went to pack. His cupboard was extraordinarily organized for a space approximately the size of a generous coffin. He had books stacked with a precision that violated the square footage, 9 of them, all obtained through the whinging public library's unfortunate habit of leaving their donations cart unattended. 3 on basic magical theory written for Muggle audiences by wizards who'd wanted to seem academic. 2 on medieval alchemical traditions that overlapped with actual magical practice more than their authors knew. 1 on theoretical physics that Harry had read because the way it described the behavior of particles at quantum scales matched, almost exactly, the way he understood magic to move through a living body. And 3 that weren't from the library at all. He'd written those himself. Composition notebooks, cheap ones, filled edge to edge in handwriting that started cramped and careful in the first and grew steadily looser and more assured. Notes on what he'd felt. What he'd remembered. The process of sorting through what was his and what wasn't. Because that had been the work of 10 years. Not the magic had always been there, humming under his skin like a second heartbeat. The work had been the sorting. It was like inheriting a house stuffed to the rafters with someone else's furniture. 7 someones, technically. 7 fragmented versions of the same someone, each carrying pieces of a life, memories like photographs taken in bad light, emotions that arrived without context, knowledge deposited in the back of his mind like books left on shelves he hadn't built. He would be doing his homework and suddenly understand, with absolute certainty, how to brew a potion that required 5 rare ingredients and 3 hours of specific temperature management. He would be falling asleep and see, briefly, a stone orphanage in winter, the smell of institutional porridge, a boy sitting alone in a corner with his knees pulled to his chest. He had learned, carefully, not to become that boy. Tom Riddle had been brilliant, damaged, furious, and terrified in equal measure. All of that knowledge, all of that extraordinary, voracious, genius-level magical knowledge, had been built on a foundation of fear. Fear of death, of powerlessness, of being ordinary, of being nothing. Harry had gone through that inheritance piece by piece, the way you'd sort a dead relative's belongings, keeping what was useful, understanding what was broken, setting aside what was irredeemable. He kept the knowledge. He kept the theory. He kept the memories he needed to understand the man Tom Riddle had chosen to become, because understanding your enemy was simply good sense. He didn't keep the fear. His mother's magic had already taken care of that. He could feel it sometimes, the way you feel warmth from a source you can't see, old, settled, woven through him at a cellular level. Lily Potter's sacrificial magic hadn't just protected him from Voldemort's curse. It had anchored him. 7 souls pouring into a 1-year-old could have been catastrophic. Should have been catastrophic. Instead, they'd hit something immovable at the center of Harry Potter and simply redistributed themselves around it. He was 11 years old, and he had never been afraid of anything in his life. He packed the 3 notebooks at the bottom of the trunk he'd bought with last year's secretly hoarded birthday money. Dudley always got cash from relatives and never noticed when a tenner went missing from the pile. Everything else on top, the library books returned with only mild guilt, a change of clothes, and the photograph he kept face down under his pillow because he didn't look at it often but wanted it nearby. His parents, young and laughing, in a garden somewhere. He put it in his front pocket. Diagon Alley arrived like a world deciding to become real. He'd taken the Charing Cross bus, found the leaky cauldron without difficulty. He knew the address from a memory that wasn't quite his own, Tom Riddle at 17 walking this same street with the focused hunger of someone who has just discovered that the world is larger than the orphanage walls, and tapped his way through the brick archway with the precise 3-tap sequence before the barman could offer to show him. The barman stared. Harry smiled and walked through. The alley opened up in full summer noise and color. Witches and wizards moved in currents through the cobbled street, robes in every shade, owls swiveling their heads from cage stacks outside Elops, the smell of parchment and something faintly sulphurous from a cauldron shop 2 doors down. Harry stood for a moment at the entrance and let the noise wash over him. He had Tom Riddle's memories of this place from multiple visits across multiple decades, each tinged with that particular hungry wonder of someone seeing proof that they are extraordinary. Harry looked at it with genuine, uncomplicated pleasure. It was simply a fascinating place. He went to Gringotts first. The goblins watched him with the calibrated wariness they applied to all humans, which Harry considered entirely reasonable given the historical record. He presented his key, retrieved from the Dursleys' kitchen drawer where Petunia had stored it with the takeaway menus and the backup tin opener, and was escorted down in the cart with the particular rattling enthusiasm that suggested the cart operator either genuinely enjoyed the descent or had decided that the best revenge on all human customers was this specific roller coaster. Vault 687 was satisfying in the way that unexpected things are. He'd known it would be substantial. He hadn't known it would be quite this substantial. Mounds of gold and silver in the torchlight, objects whose magical signatures he could feel from the doorway, a warm throb of protective enchantments, old charms worked, the faint residue of a shield charm cast and recast over generations. He took enough to cover school supplies and kept his expression neutral as the goblin watched him with undisguised curiosity. "Interesting vault," Harry said pleasantly. The goblin's expression didn't change, but something behind the eyes sharpened. "Indeed," it said. Harry smiled, pocketed his gold, and went shopping. Madame Malkin's first, 4 robes. He was being measured, arms out, chin up, the tape measure doing its independent business around his torso, when the stool beside him was occupied by a boy with platinum hair and the particular posture of someone who had been told since birth that posture was important. Draco Malfoy looked him over with the efficient assessment of someone accustomed to sorting people into categories within seconds of meeting them. Hogwarts? Draco said. Yes. Me too. Do you know what house you'll be in? Harry considered this with genuine interest. I suspect the Sorting Hat will find me educational, he said. Draco blinked, apparently having anticipated a different kind of answer. My family's always been in Slytherin, he offered, the way you'd offer a credential. Strong house, Harry said, and meant it. The memories of Slytherin that he carried were complicated. Tom Riddle's love of it was bound up in his need for belonging, for proof that he was special, and so the love was real but the reasons were tangled. Harry could appreciate the house on its own merits. Ambition and cunning were genuinely useful qualities when they weren't being used as compensation. You're Harry Potter, Draco said. Not a question. He'd been staring at the scar for a moment with what he clearly thought was subtlety. Most people figure that out eventually, Harry said. My father says, Draco started, and then stopped. Something in Harry's expression, which was entirely pleasant and entirely attentive, seemed to make him recalibrate. He says you know who did great things. Terrible, but great. Harry turned his head just enough to look at him properly. Draco's jaw was set in that way boys set their jaws when they're saying something they've rehearsed and are hoping lands correctly. He was testing something. Seeing what Harry would do with the provocation. Your father's half right, Harry said. He was extraordinary. The greatness just ate the person underneath until there was nothing left but fear wearing a clever mask. He paused. What do you think? Not what he told you to think. What do you actually think? Draco stared at him. The tape measure finished and whipped itself back to its hook. Madame Malkin said something about 3 weeks for delivery and Draco slid off his stool, and Harry could see the precise moment the boy decided he wasn't done with this conversation. That he intended to find it again somewhere. Good, Harry thought. He suspected Draco Malfoy was considerably more interesting than his circumstances had let him be so far. He found the bookshop purely by instinct and stayed in it for 40 minutes, which was the maximum he permitted himself because he had a limited budget and an already extensive internal library and he was trying to be strategic. He bought the standard texts plus 4 additional volumes that weren't on any list, a history of preministry magical governance, a comparative study of wandless and wand-focused casting theory, a text on Parseltongue linguistics that the shopkeeper found under his counter with evident surprise, and a slim volume on magical inheritance theory that had a layer of dust suggesting it hadn't been touched in some time. He also needed a wand. Ollivander's was the sort of shop that felt like it was considering you before you walked in, which Harry thought was not entirely a metaphor. The bell chimed and the old man materialized from between the towering boxes with the same pale, moonlight gaze that Harry recognized from a memory that was nearly 50 years old, Tom Riddle, 16, walking in with his chin high and his jaw set, already knowing he was going to have something remarkable. Ollivander looked at Harry Potter and went very still. I wondered when I'd see you, he said. I've been available, Harry said pleasantly. Your parents' wands. Holly and Phoenix Feather, 11 inches, for your father. Willow and Unicorn Hair for your mother. He came closer, examining Harry's scar with the academic interest of an expert seeing his own work referenced unexpectedly. And the wand that gave you that scar. You and Phoenix Feather. 13.5 inches. I know, Harry said. Ollivander's eyes snapped to his. Do you? The same phoenix gave the feather for both wands. Yours gave the feather for mine, I'd imagine. Harry glanced at the old man's pocket, where the slight bulge of a wand sat. Given the nature of what happened to Voldemort's wand the night he used it on me, I suspect mine is going to be something adjacent. Similar feather, different wood. The magic would want to echo, wouldn't it? The silence stretched. Holly, Ollivander said finally. Holly and Phoenix Feather. 11 inches. Supple. He produced it from a box he retrieved without looking, handed it over, and watched. Harry held the wand and felt it like a greeting. Not the burst of sparks some wand-makers like to describe, not a dramatic flash. Just a settling, like a key turning in a lock you didn't know was locked. The air smelled briefly of something floral, old, warm. "Good Lord," Ollivander whispered. "Does that usually happen?" Harry asked. "The warmth?" The wand-maker sat down on a stool behind his counter as though his legs had made a decision without him. "Not like that. Not with that quality of resonance." "What are you, Mr. Potter?" It was a real question. Not rhetorical, not frightened. Genuinely, professionally curious. Harry considered him. Then he said, "Something new." Ollivander nodded slowly, as though this answered more than it asked. "Take good care of it," he said. "It will take good care of you." He met the Weasleys at King's Cross. Not because he'd engineered it, he'd arrived at the station at 10:20 and found platform 9 quite easily, having memorized the location from a memory that was not his own, but because a family attempting to shepherd 4 children and their luggage through a barrier while a woman with spectacular red hair simultaneously tried to prevent her shortest member from announcing, "Platform 9 3/4, to a passing businessman was simply unmissable. He watched the youngest boy, round-faced, a bit of egg on his robes, stall in front of the barrier with sudden uncertainty. Harry pulled his trolley up beside him. "Better running," Harry said. "Works better if you commit." The boy turned and took him in. Blue eyes, freckles, the same red hair as the rest of the family. "You first, then," he said, a bit combative, a bit curious. Harry hit the barrier at a comfortable trot and came through onto a platform billowing with steam that tasted of coal and magic. The scarlet engine was bigger than it seemed like a thing should be allowed to be, and it was beautiful in the specific way that things are beautiful when they've been doing the same job with excellence for 100 years. The boy came through half a second later, grinning despite himself. "Ron," the woman said, emerging behind him with a wagon load of children and luggage. "Oh, hello, dear, I don't think we've..." Her eyes found the scar, and she did the same thing most people did, which was stare briefly and then make a visible effort to reassemble her expression. "You're Harry Potter," Harry said, and held out his hand. "Good morning. Molly Weasley," she said, shaking it with surprised warmth. "These are my boys, Fred, George," twins who were already assessing him with identical expressions of calculation that Harry found charming, Percy, older, prefect badge being worn with what could only be described as ceremony, and Ron, apparently you've already met. "Sort of," Ron said. "He's good at barriers." The twins laughed. Fred, or possibly George, pointed at Harry with a directness that suggested they'd already decided something. "You're coming in our compartment," he said. "Other way round," the other twin said. "We're coming in yours." "Same result," Harry said. "Let's go." The train ride north took the best part of a day, and Harry spent most of it in a compartment that grew incrementally more crowded as various Weasleys cycled through, plus one bookish girl with exceptional hair who came looking for a toad and stayed for 3 hours. Hermione Granger had the particular quality of someone who had spent a long time being the smartest person in any room and was simultaneously proud of this and painfully aware of what it had cost her socially. She sat down with the precision of someone performing casualness, glanced around the compartment, and began talking because silence made her nervous. She'd read everything on the curriculum list and several things that weren't on it. She was Muggle-born, she said this with a slight set to her jaw that anticipated challenge. She'd been told she was an unusually powerful witch for her background, she was going to work very hard and do everything properly. Harry listened to all of this and said, at the end, "What did you think of A History of Magic?" She blinked. It was comprehensive. A bit dry. Bagshot scholarship is excellent but her narrative instincts are terrible, Harry said. Her early modern chapters are better than her ancient history ones because she's more comfortable with primary sources. If you cross-reference her work on the Statute of Secrecy with Moody's Underground, Wizarding Europe 1400 to 1689, the picture she paints is considerably more interesting. Hermione stared at him. "That book isn't on any list." "No," Harry agreed. Where did you get it? Diagon Alley. It's in the back of Flourish and Blots, behind the self-correcting quills. She processed this. Ron was watching the exchange with the expression of someone at a tennis match who isn't sure of the rules but can tell something impressive is happening. "You're Harry Potter," she said. "Yes. I've read about you." "Well, there isn't much. The books mostly just say you survived and nobody knows how." She paused, studying him. The quality of her attention shifted slightly, the way attention shifts when you move from cataloging to actually looking. "Do you know how?" The compartment got quiet. Even the twins, who had been flicking exploding snap cards at each other, paused. Harry met Hermione's eyes. She was sharp, genuinely sharp, the kind of sharp that wanted real answers and could handle them. "Yes," he said. "Well, it's complicated," he said. "And I'll tell you eventually. Not because I'm being mysterious, I just prefer to wait until I can give you the proper version, which requires more time than we have before we arrive." Something in her face shifted, not satisfaction, exactly. More like a recalibration. She had expected deflection or false modesty or the, "I don't know," that every book apparently quoted. She'd gotten a promise of something specific, delivered by someone who meant it. "All right," she said, and the tension went out of her shoulders. "Fine." Ron reached into a battered bag and produced a slightly squashed sandwich. "Cauldron cake," he offered to the compartment generally. The boats crossed the lake in a stillness that felt designed, the castle rising out of the darkness on the far side with every light blazing in every window, and Harry heard the sound the first years made around him, that collective, involuntary intake of breath, and felt something that surprised him. Not the intellectual appreciation he'd expected. Not the catalogued recognition of a place he'd approached through decades of borrowed memory. Just wonder. Clean and straightforward. My school, he thought, and it was entirely his own thought, carrying entirely his own weight. My own place. He hadn't had that before. The Dursleys' house was not his. His cupboard was not his. He'd lived in those places and understood them as temporary the way you understand a waiting room as temporary. This felt different. This felt like something you moved toward, not through. He pulled this feeling apart and examined it with interest because he didn't entirely know how to have it. The entrance hall smelled of stone and candle wax and centuries of collective magical use, a deep, saturated smell like the inside of a very old library that had also, at some point, been slightly on fire. Professor McGonagall met them at the base of the stairs, tall, tartan-robed, with the expression of someone who has done this 40 times and found each iteration equally important. She spoke clearly about the 4 houses, about honor, about the sorting. Harry looked around the entrance hall. Hermione was listening to McGonagall with the fixed attention of someone committing the speech to memory. Ron was looking at the ceiling with his mouth slightly open. Draco Malfoy, across the group, met Harry's eyes with that particular expression he'd been wearing in the robe shop, still working something out. And at the back of the hall, half concealed by a pillar, a figure in a turban watched the first years with eyes that darted too quickly and hands that would not stay still. Harry felt at the moment his gaze landed on the man, a familiar signature, the way you recognize a piece of music you haven't heard for a long time. Something dark and fractured and very old wound around a frightened human consciousness, a parasite making itself at home. Hello, Harry thought. Not to the man. To the thing inside him. The thing inside Quirrell flinched. Harry smiled and looked away. The great hall opened up above the first years like a vast, collective dream, and the floating candles threw warm light across 4 long tables packed with students in house robes, all of them craning to see the new arrivals, and at the head of the hall the staff table ran the width of the room with the easy authority of a thing that had occupied this position for 1,000 years. Harry took in the hall with one sweeping look and catalogued. Stone walls hung with banners, the ceiling showing actual stars through its enchanted surface, the specific arrangement of the staff table. He found Dumbledore immediately. He'd have been unmissable in any room, the silver beard alone, but also the quality of attention he was directing at the first-year line. Not the benign, twinkly survey of an old man watching children arrive. Something more focused. He found Harry in about 3 seconds, which was approximately what Harry had expected. He also found the man beside Quirrell, because that was the only accurate way to frame it, the dark-robed professor with the greasy black hair and the hard, still face who was watching the first years with the expression of someone performing neutrality over something much more complicated. Snape's eyes found Harry's scar with the same gravitational inevitability as everyone else's. Then they moved to Harry's face. Harry looked at him directly, pleasantly, with the uncomplicated warmth of someone who means nothing threatening by anything. Snape looked away. Something shifted behind his eyes, something like confusion, rapidly suppressed. The Sorting Hat's song was long and performative, and the hat itself was battered in a way that suggested 7 centuries of having opinions about teenagers. When it finished, McGonagall began calling names. Harry waited with his hands in his pockets. Granger, Hermione. The hat barely touched Hermione's head. Gryffindor, it shouted, and she walked to the table flushed with relief she was trying to conceal. Malfoy, Draco. Slytherin, before the hat had settled, and Draco went to the green table with his chin up, finding Harry's eye again across the room with an expression Harry was beginning to read as "I'm going to figure you out if it takes all year." Neville Longbottom. A round-faced boy Harry had briefly spoken to on the boat's trip going up, recovered, and was eventually sorted into Gryffindor. Potter, Harry. The room reacted. The buzz of conversation dropped to silence with a unanimity that was almost musical. Every head turned. Harry walked through the parted air with the same easy pace he'd walked through everything today, sat on the stool, and let McGonagall lower the hat onto his head. The hat's voice inside his mind was different from how he'd imagined it, less booming, more conversational. Like a very old person who has made their peace with most things and simply wants to have a sensible chat. Well, it said. Yes, Harry agreed. I've sorted a great many students, the hat said. I've had boys with more ambition than sense, girls with courage that could have used tempering, scholars with more knowledge than wisdom. I've had dark wizards who didn't know they were dark yet. I've had saints who weren't sure they deserved to be. A pause. I have never had anything like this. I expect not, Harry said. You've got the lot of them in there, don't you? All 7. The hat sounded genuinely interested rather than alarmed, which Harry appreciated. I can feel them. Like stars in the same sky. Same origin, different trajectories. And you're in the middle, and you've organized them all. More or less, Harry said. Still working on the edges. Where to put you? The hat seemed to be thinking aloud. Slytherin would have you in an instant, you've enough of Salazar in you to fill 3 students. Ravenclaw would worship you. Hufflepuff would love you. Another pause. But there's something else at the center of all of this, under everything else, that's just stubborn and warm and absolutely refuses to believe that any obstacle is final. What is that? My mum, Harry said simply. The hat was quiet for a moment. Gryffindor. It announced to the hall, and there was something in its voice that sounded almost like it was answering a deeper question than the one it was asked. The Gryffindor table erupted. The twins, both already sorted, he noted, were standing. Ron, arriving 3 names later, hooped before he'd even reached the stool. Harry sat down beside Hermione, who handed him a plate of roast chicken as though she'd been waiting for him specifically. Good, she said. You expected that? Harry asked. I expected it to take longer, she said, which was probably the most honest answer she could have given. He was halfway through his roast when he felt it. Not felt, registered. The way you register a sound that's slightly wrong. Across the hall at the staff table, Snape was looking at him again, this time with an intensity that had moved past professional assessment into something older and less controlled. Trying to read something. Looking for something he wasn't finding. Harry knew what it was. He could feel Snape's acclimacy from here, walls built well, maintained by habit, the practiced mental architecture of a spy who had been using it for so long it had become structural. And beneath those walls, something raw and complex that the man would have been horrified to know was partially legible to Harry from 30 feet away. There was Lily's magic in Harry. He'd always known it, the warmth of it was the oldest thing in him, older than any of Tom Riddle's memories. And Snape could feel it, faintly, the way you catch a scent of something familiar in an unfamiliar place, and it was making him deeply, functionally unable to resolve Harry into a simple category. Harry met his eyes. Snape looked away first. Then back. His jaw moved slightly. Harry reached for the roast potatoes with a serenity that was not performance. He was simply not concerned. Percy says the defense teacher is new, Ron said, mouth full. The one with the turban. Harry looked down the table to where Percy Weasley was applying himself to dinner with the focused energy of someone who considered every meal an opportunity to do something correctly. Do you know why he wears it? Percy says he was cursed by a troll in the African desert, Ron said, and this clearly struck him as both plausible and impressive. Harry said. Hermione glanced between them. She had the look of someone who had more actions request aborted right the next chapter now. Chapter 2, The Weight of Seven Minds. The first week of classes at Hogwarts operated on a logic that Harry found genuinely charming, the idea that you could take 11-year-olds, hand them wands, point them at inanimate objects, and say make something happen with the reasonable expectation that something useful would result. He appreciated the optimism. He sat in his first Transfiguration class and watched McGonagall turn her desk into a pig and back again with the clean, unhesitating precision of someone who had done this so many times. The magic had become like breathing, not effortless exactly, but deeply internalized. The gap between thought and execution closed to almost nothing. The pig blinked twice and became a desk again, and McGonagall turned to the class with the expression of someone who has made her point. That, she said, is Transfiguration. It is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at this school. Anyone who messes around in my class will leave and not come back. She let the silence hold for a moment. You will begin with matches. Harry's match became a needle on the first try. Not a partial transformation, not a slightly needle-shaped match, not a silvery-tipped stick, but a perfect sewing needle, sharp and bright, lying on the desk with the complete serenity of a thing that had always been what it was. McGonagall picked it up. Examined it. Set it down. Mr. Potter, she said. Professor. She looked at him with an expression that was professionally composed and privately registering something significant. Do it again, she said. Different object. That quill. She set one on the desk beside him. Harry looked at the quill and turned it into a letter opener, a silver one, with a faint Celtic knotwork pattern on the handle, because if you were going to demonstrate something you might as well be thorough. The class had gone very quiet. Again, McGonagall said. Her voice had gone to the careful neutrality of a scientist trying not to corrupt their own data. The inkwell. The inkwell became a small stone sculpture of a sleeping cat, approximately 4 inches tall, perfectly rendered in grey granite with a texture that caught the light correctly. McGonagall picked it up. Turned it in her hands. How, she said quietly, which wasn't quite a question and wasn't quite a statement, the word existing in the space between them. Theory helps, Harry said, because it was the most honest short answer. If you understand what you're asking the object to become at a structural level, the magic has cleaner instructions. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes moved briefly, not to the scar, like most people, but to his hands. His wand, lying on the desk, untouched for the last 2 demonstrations. Harry followed her gaze. Then, because she'd noticed anyway, he picked up the wand and held it up to show her. I was curious whether the wandless work held to the same quality, he said. It does. Slightly slower, but the output is equivalent. You didn't use your wand, McGonagall said, and this was absolutely a statement, arriving with the weight of all the implications behind it. For the last 2, no. The first one I used it because I thought it was polite to start conventionally. She set the stone cat down very carefully, as though setting it down too hard might break something. "Potter," she said. "Professor? See me after class." "Of course," Harry said pleasantly. At the desk beside him, Hermione had abandoned her own match entirely and was staring at the stone cat with her lower lip caught between her teeth, running some internal calculation that was either going to take a while or was going to resolve very shortly into something like a decision. Ron, on his other side, was looking at Harry the way you look at something you can't quite categorize. Not with suspicion exactly. More like the look you give a map that seems to show more territory than you were expecting. After class, while the rest of the Gryffindors filed out into the corridor in a state of murmur, Harry stood beside McGonagall's desk and waited while she collected herself. She did this with the contained efficiency of a very competent person managing something unexpected, straightening parchments that were already straight, aligning her quill with the edge of her desk. "Wandless transfiguration," she said, "at an acceptable level of complexity and precision, is Newt's standard. It is taught in 7th year. Some students never achieve it." She paused. "You are 11. "Yes," Harry said. "Where did you learn it?" He considered this. He'd thought about how to handle these conversations. There were going to be more of them, with more professors, and he needed an approach that was honest without being something that would end up in a report to Dumbledore within the hour. Not that he was afraid of Dumbledore. But he wanted to choose the timing of that particular conversation himself. "I've been reading since I was 4, he said. "I had access to some theoretical texts that weren't standard, and the magical theory side of transfiguration made sense to me when I approached it from a structural physics perspective. Once the theory was solid, the practice followed." This was true. Everything he'd just said was completely true. McGonagall looked at him carefully. She was an exceptionally intelligent woman and she knew she was being given something partial. He could see her deciding whether to press. "You will still be expected to follow the curriculum," she said finally. "Of course," Harry said. "I'll present the standard exercises and progress at the appropriate documented pace. I have no interest in making anyone uncomfortable." She considered this. "That's either very wise," she said, "or very calculating." "Both, I'd hope," Harry said. "They're not mutually exclusive." A breath. The closest thing to a laugh she seemed prepared to offer. "Dismissed, Potter." He went. Charms was taught by a man so small he stood on a stack of books to address the class, which should have been comic but somehow wasn't. Professor Flitwick had the quality of someone whose authority was so completely internal that the physical dimension had simply become irrelevant. He was delighted by everything, in the specific way of someone whose delight was genuine rather than performed, and Harry liked him immediately. "The levitation charm," Flitwick announced, "the Wingardium Leviosa. Ah, that's it, well done at the back, don't waggle the wand, it's a swish and flick, like so," and the class dissolved into the cheerful chaos of 11-year-olds making feathers violently resist gravity. Harry levitated his feather on the first attempt, guided it in a precise figure 8 around Hermione's, and set it back on the desk. He spent the rest of the class making extremely small levitations of the components of his inkwell, separating the lid from the base by half an inch, moving individual drops of spilled ink across the desk, because he was genuinely curious about the lower threshold of the charm and the curriculum wasn't addressing it. Flitwick noticed midway through the lesson and came to stand at Harry's shoulder and watch for a full minute without saying anything. "The charm's effective range," he said at last. "You're mapping it." "The lower end," Harry said. "The upper end seems well documented but the precision work at small scale is interesting. The magic required doesn't scale linearly with size, there's a plateau effect between about 5 centimeters and 20 that I can't quite account for theoretically." Flitwick made a sound that was quiet and high and possibly the sound a man makes when he has just been given a genuinely interesting research question by a first year. "Mr. Potter," he said, "I would very much like to have a conversation with you about charms theory at some point this term." "I'd enjoy that," Harry said, and meant it. Hermione, who had managed a successful levitation 3 minutes before the rest of the class and had been listening to this exchange, turned to look at Harry with the expression she'd been developing since the train, the one that suggested she was revising a document she thought was finished. "How much have you read?" she asked quietly. "A lot," Harry said. "More than me?" He thought about this honestly. "Different than you," he said. "You've probably got the curriculum covered more systematically. What I have is wider but less organized." She absorbed this. "We should compare notes," she said. "We should," Harry agreed. This appeared to be the beginning of something that both of them recognized in the moment, with the particular clarity that comes from two people who don't often find their match discovering that they have. Potions was Thursday morning, in the dungeons, in a classroom that smelled of something astringent and complex and very old. Harry arrived early, which meant he was seated when Snape entered, and had a moment to observe the professor before Snape observed the class. Snape moved through the dungeon classroom with the efficiency of someone who had designed the space around their own requirements. He set nothing down, touched nothing unnecessarily, and reached the front of the room and turned to face them with the stillness of a man who was in his own element. The dungeon was his. Everyone in it was on his terms. He surveyed the class. His eyes moved through the Gryffindors and Slytherins, they shared potions, with the systematic assessment of someone looking for immediate problems. They found Harry. Harry met the look with complete equanimity. Something moved behind Snape's eyes. The same thing as at the feast, that attempt to resolve, that flash of something that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite confusion. Then the professional neutrality reasserted itself, hard and immediate. "Potter," Snape said. "Not a greeting. A test." "Professor," Harry said. "Not a challenge. Just a fact." Snape let the moment hang, the particular technique of a man who uses silence like a tool, and then addressed the class. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion-making." His voice was low and carried without volume, the way voices do when they've learned to use resonance rather than projection. "There will be no foolish wand-waving here. Many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will understand the beauty of the softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, and snaring the senses." He paused. "I can teach you to brew glory, to bottle fame, to put a stopper in death, if you aren't, as I see most of you are, a pack of the dullest students it has ever been my misfortune to teach." Harry found the speech genuinely compelling in its construction. The contempt was performative, the contempt of a man who loved something passionately and had spent decades watching it be treated carelessly. There was grief underneath the performance. Snape turned to him. It had probably been inevitable that this was where the speech arrived. "Potter." The voice dropped into a register that the class clearly recognized as something uncomfortable arriving. "Our new celebrity. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry folded his hands on the desk. "A sleeping potion of such power it's known as the draught of living death," he said. "The asphodel is key, it's the binder that determines the depth of the effect. Without it, wormwood alone gives you something much cruder." The silence was different from the one that usually followed a correct answer. "More complicated." "Where," Snape said, and his voice was still flat, "would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat. It's a calcified mineral deposit that acts as a general antidote to most poisons, though it's more reliable for ingested toxins than magical ones applied topically." "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "They're the same plant," Harry said, "also known as aconite. The name variation is regional, monkshood in Britain, wolfsbane in continental Europe, primarily. The common name variation created the historical confusion in pre-standardization potion texts, which is why some older recipes appear to require both and some appear to require neither." The classroom was very still. Snape stared at him. Not with the triumph of a man whose trap had failed to spring, with something more unsettled, a man whose framework for what this particular student should be had just been contradicted loudly. Evidently, Snape said, and his voice had shifted to something almost quiet, fame is no guarantee of competence. It appears some celebrities have managed to open a book. Several books, Harry said, pleasantly. The boy beside him, a Slytherin named Nott, drew a sharp breath. A few Gryffindors went very still. Snape looked at Harry with the expression of a man who had just moved a chess piece and discovered the board was different than he'd thought. 20 points to Gryffindor, he said, and somehow made it sound like an accusation. He turned to the board and began writing the first practical assignment, and Harry opened his notebook, and neither of them said anything else for the rest of the lesson. But Snape's attention returned to Harry 9 more times in 40 minutes, and Harry counted each one the way you count something that matters. The practical portion of potions revealed something that Harry had suspected but hadn't confirmed, that knowing the theory and having a physical body that cooperated with it were separate skills, and he was still building the second one. The knife work required practice. His first slice of lacewing flies was slightly uneven, and he corrected it, and it was fine, but it bothered him in the way that imprecision bothered him. He didn't mind not being perfect at something physical. He minded it in a specific way that made him want to practice until it stopped being the case. Hermione's knife work was immaculate. She'd clearly been practicing on vegetables at home. "You're chopping," she said, glancing sideways. "Working on it," Harry said. "Hold the blade flatter," she said, and demonstrated with a quick movement that was entirely efficient. "You're letting the edge lift at the end of the stroke." Harry adjusted. The next slice was clean. "Better," she said. "Thank you," Harry said, and meant it fully, which seemed to slightly surprise her. She'd half expected deflection. At the end of class, Snape swept through examining cauldrons. He reached Harry's, looked down at the shimmering pale green liquid inside, and stood there for a moment with his hands clasped behind his back. The boil cure potion was supposed to be pale green. It was supposed to have a slight luminescence. Harry's was exactly pale green, exactly luminescent, exactly correct in every measurement. Snape said nothing. He moved on. But halfway across the room he stopped, and Harry could see the line of his shoulders, the tension in his back, the moment of decision-making. He came back. "Your knife work was uneven in the initial preparation," Snape said, quietly enough that it was really only directed at Harry. "I know. I've corrected it for next time. See that you do." A pause. "The potion itself is adequate." For Snape, in week 1, Harry was fairly sure this was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The thing about Quirrell was that he was very good at appearing to be afraid. Harry had known this since the moment on the platform when he'd felt the parasitic presence, that fragmented, hungry consciousness wound into Quirrell's like ivy into a fence. He'd had a week to observe the performance and it was technically impressive. The stutter, the flinching, the nervous fumbling with the turban, all of it calibrated to read as a weak, traumatized man. The kind of man people looked at and felt slightly sorry for and mostly ignored. Harry understood the value of that kind of camouflage. But in class, behind the performance, something else moved. Quirrell's lectures on dark creatures were accurate, detailed, and occasionally contained pieces of information that were considerably more advanced than the curriculum required, fragments of knowledge slipping out like coins falling from a hole in a pocket. Harry collected them quietly. The third defense class, Quirrell assigned them a written exercise and moved to the front of the room to mark parchments. Harry wrote his essay in 10 minutes and spent the remaining 20 watching Quirrell. The slight tremor in the man's hands. The way his eyes moved when he thought no one was looking, not with fear, but with a quick, calculating intelligence that the stutter and the flinching normally covered. The way he occasionally tilted his head at a specific angle, as though listening to something. "I know you're aware of me," Harry thought, very clearly, directing it at the thing behind Quirrell's eyes rather than the man himself. Quirrell's pen stopped moving. He didn't look up. His face stayed perfectly still. But the tremor in his hands increased fractionally and then, visibly, he controlled it. Harry smiled at his parchment and kept writing. After class, Ron fell into step beside him in the corridor. "Quirrell's a bit rubbish, isn't he?" Ron said. "My dad says he was fine before he took that year off traveling. Came back completely different." "What kind of different?" Harry said. "Scared of everything, according to Dad. Like he ran into something in the forests of Albania and got properly rattled." Ron shrugged. "Still, can't be fun teaching defense when you're afraid of dark magic." "No," Harry agreed. "I imagine it can't." Albania. Harry filed this away next to everything else. The Quidditch announcement came in the second week, posted by the Gryffindor notice board, and Harry read it with mild interest and then moved on because he had other things to think about, but Ron read it and grabbed his arm. "Tryouts," Ron said. "You should try out." "For what position?" "Seeker, obviously. You'd be incredible." "Look," Ron gestured, apparently at Harry's general existence, as though this constituted an argument. "I've never played," Harry said. "Have you ever ridden a broom?" Harry thought about this. "No." "Right, but," Ron was searching for a framing that worked. "You'd figure it out. You figure everything out." This was flattering and also slightly alarming as a basis for joining a competitive sport. Harry looked at the notice again. Madam Hooch. Flying lesson, Friday. He supposed he'd see how the broom felt. The flying lesson happened on a perfect autumn afternoon, the grass still green, the air carrying the first edge of September chill. The class stood in two lines with broomsticks on the ground, Slytherins and Gryffindors, and Madam Hooch moved down the rows with the brisk authority of someone whose patience for nonsense was precisely calibrated to zero. "Hold out your right hand over your broom," she said. "And say, 'Up.'" "Up," Harry said. The broom snapped to his hand before the word was fully formed. Not sharply, not the violent slap of an object responding to magic too clumsily applied. It rose and settled into his grip with the smooth authority of something that recognized him, and Harry's hand closed around it and he felt the same settling he'd felt with the wand in Ollivander's, something finding its correct arrangement. Beside him, Hermione's broom rolled over and lay still. Neville's shot up and hit him in the face. Ron's came up immediately. He had clearly done this before, the ease of someone who grew up with brooms in the back garden. "Nice," Ron said, eyeing Harry's. Harry looked down the length of the broom. It was school standard, a clean sweep 5, old and slightly worn at the bristle end, but the feel was clean. Madam Hooch demonstrated mount and hover, and they mounted, and Harry kicked off and went up 10 feet, and that was when he understood why people flew. It was the only experience he'd had that was purely physical, purely present, that didn't run through the archive of borrowed memory and theoretical knowledge before arriving at sensation. There was nothing in Tom Riddle's mind about joy in flight. He'd flown functionally, in the way you use a tool. Harry went up 20 feet and felt the wind hit him, cold and clean and indifferent, and felt the broom respond to his weight and the slight pressure of his knees with a sensitivity that was almost conversational, and felt something release in his chest that he hadn't known was held. He went up another 20 feet because he wanted to. The school opened up below him, the courtyard, the grounds, the lake glinting in the afternoon light like hammered metal. "Mr. Potter." Madam Hooch called up. "We stay at 10 feet. Harry came back down to 10 feet. He was grinning. He was aware that he was grinning and did nothing to stop it. Ron was laughing at him from 2 feet away. "See," he said. "I told you." The incident with Neville happened the way things happened at Hogwarts, quickly, as a result of several separate decisions all being bad simultaneously. Draco had Neville's Remembrall, was holding it over his head from a height that made recovery impossible, and was looking down at Harry in the courtyard with an expression that was testing something. Harry stood below and waited. "Want to come and get it?" Draco called. "I want you to give it back," Harry said. "Not the same thing." "Come on, then. Catch." He threw it, not toward Neville, toward the far side of the courtyard, an underhanded fling that put the small glass ball in a long dropping arc that would end with it shattering on the flagstones. Harry was on a broom and had the ball before Draco had finished the throwing motion, which was before Draco had landed back on his own broom, which meant Harry had time to come back around and be level with Draco's face while Draco was still registering what had happened. He held the remembrall out and looked at Draco. Draco's expression cycled through several things: surprise, then something like admiration that he was clearly reluctant to feel, then the particular look of someone whose test has returned a result they didn't expect. "Give it a rest, Draco," Harry said, almost gently. "You're better than this." Draco stared at him. The "you're better than this" had landed wrong, not in a way that produced anger but in a way that produced a silence behind the eyes. He wheeled his broom and went back toward the castle without answering, and Harry delivered the remembrall to Neville, who clutched it with trembling hands. "Thank you," Neville said. "He wouldn't have actually hurt you," Harry said. "But he also needs to know there's a consequence. He'll work that out." He'd seen it in Draco's face. The thing Draco Malfoy carried was his father's reputation, his father's values, his father's need for dominance, and at 11 years old he hadn't had enough time alone with himself to know which parts of that were genuinely his and which parts he was performing. Harry knew this shape well. He'd spent a long time sorting through a very similar pile. McGonagall found him 10 minutes later. "I saw that from my window," she said, without preamble. "I returned Neville's property," Harry said. "You performed a catch that I've only seen from trained Quidditch players." She paused. "I've spoken to Oliver Wood. Gryffindor has needed a seeker since last year. You'll receive a proper broom." Harry thought of the 10 seconds on the clean sweep, the cold air, the light off the lake. "I'd enjoy that," he said. The troll happened on Halloween. Harry knew something was wrong before the feast started. He'd been watching Quirrell all week with the particular attention of someone who knows what they're looking for, and tonight Quirrell was not himself, or rather, whatever himself had become was closer to the surface, the performance straining under some pressure. His hands on the table were completely still, which was unusual because the stutter and flinch performance required a certain amount of physical movement to sell, and stillness was Quirrell's tell. He became still when the thing inside him was doing the thinking. Harry was halfway through his food when the doors banged open and Quirrell came staggering in, the performance back on, full trembling, voice raised in panic. "Troll. In the dungeon. Thought you ought to know," and collapsed. The hall erupted. Dumbledore's voice cut through the panic. Prefects moved. Students flooded toward the exits. Harry sat for a moment and thought. Troll in the dungeon. Quirrell had come from the dungeon corridor, which was also where the staff room was, which Quirrell had presumably just come from. The timing was precisely too perfect. Hermione didn't know about the troll. She'd been in the bathroom all afternoon. Had she come out yet? "Hermione," he said to Ron. Ron's face changed. "She doesn't know, bathroom near the east staircase," Harry said, already moving. They went against the flow of students, which would have been difficult if Harry hadn't moved through crowds with a natural ease that opened corridors without force. People simply stepped aside, without being asked and without quite knowing why they'd done it. Ron kept pace behind him, and they turned into the east corridor and found the bathroom and found Hermione. She was in the doorway, pale, clearly having heard the noise but not the reason. "What's happening?" she started, and then the smell hit them all simultaneously, something ancient and wrong and very large, and the troll rounded the far end of the corridor with all the purposeful indifference of something that has decided this particular hallway will do. 12 feet if it was an inch. Gray skin the texture of old concrete. The club it carried was bigger than Dudley, and Dudley was large. Hermione made a sound. "In," Harry said, and steered her back into the bathroom by her shoulder. Ron had gone white. "Wands," he said, which was good instinctual thinking for someone who had never been in a fight. "Yes," Harry said. He held his wand loosely at his side and looked at the troll, which had followed them into the bathroom doorway with the unhurried confidence of something that has never been wrong about being the largest thing in a room. The bathroom was small. The troll filled it from the doorway inward. Hermione had backed against the far wall between two sinks. The troll raised its club. Harry said, clearly, Wingardium Leviosa. Not at the troll. At the club. The club left the troll's hand with enough velocity that the troll's arm continued upward in an arc from momentum, and the club crossed the bathroom ceiling and came back down on the troll's own head with a crack that resonated in the stone walls and left a silence that was both very sudden and very complete. The troll sat down. Then it fell sideways. The floor shook. Harry lowered his wand. Hermione had her hands over her mouth. Ron was staring at the troll, then at Harry, then at the troll again, with the expression of someone whose reference points have all moved simultaneously. That's what you do with the levitation charm, Harry said, to no one in particular. Flitwick was right that the upper range is better documented. Hermione made a sound that was possibly a laugh that hadn't fully decided to be one. Brilliant, Ron said. McGonagall arrived with Snape and Quirrell 30 seconds later. McGonagall's face went through approximately 8 expressions in 2 seconds when she took in the scene. Snape examined the troll with the focused attention of someone conducting a forensic assessment, and then his eyes moved to Harry, and stayed. Harry met the look. Snape's jaw worked. Weasley, Granger, you're both unharmed. McGonagall said. Yes, Professor, Hermione said. Harry, she stopped. Started again. It was my fault. I went looking for the troll. I thought I could handle it. The boys came to find me and Harry, Miss Granger, McGonagall said, and her voice was very careful, the troll is unconscious. On the floor. With its own club on its head. Harry did that, Hermione said, with a directness that suggested she'd decided she was not going to understate what had happened. With the levitation charm. The silence was brief and specific. 5 points to Gryffindor, McGonagall said, 4, for presence of mind. She sounded as though she'd started that sentence without knowing exactly where it was going to land. Snape was still looking at Harry. Harry looked back at him with the same uncomplicated, pleasant steadiness as always. What are you looking for? He thought, not unkindly. What is it you're trying to find? Quirrell stood against the wall with his arms folded, watching the troll with the careful performance of someone extremely horrified by the violence. He was very good at his face. Harry glanced at him once as they left. Quirrell's hands were still. Later that night, after Hermione and Ron had gone up to the dormitory and the common room had emptied, Harry sat in the window seat with his knees up in the castle dark outside and worked through what he knew. The stone first. The trapdoor on the third-floor corridor, Fluffy, Hagrid had mentioned it while assuring them the school was safe, which was its own kind of confirmation, was protecting something. He'd pieced it together from the combination of Hagrid's visit to Gringotts Vault 713 in July, a fragment of overheard staff room conversation in the first week, and a memory that wasn't his own, Dumbledore and Flammel, old friends, an arrangement about something irreplaceable. The Philosopher's Stone. Of course it was the stone. It had always been going to be the stone, given what was walking around in Quirrell's head trying to get its body back. He thought about this with a clarity that surprised him sometimes, the cleanness of not being afraid. Tom Riddle at any stage of his existence would have been building responses to this situation from the foundation of fear, which meant his responses would always have been about control, about removing the threat before it could become something worse. Harry sat in the window and thought about it the way you'd think about a chess problem. What do the pieces want, where are they moving, what does the board look like in 6 moves? Voldemort wanted the stone for immortality, which was interesting because he was already technically immortal, his soul was still somewhere, attached to something, and Harry could feel it the way you can feel a low-frequency vibration, a hum beneath the audible range. Whatever was in Quirrell was not all of him. It was a fragment, thin and hungry and desperate in the way fragments were. It would make its move toward the stone eventually. Harry could let it. The third-floor corridor wasn't going anywhere, and the protections on whatever was down there were presumably functional. He could let Voldemort's fragment burn itself out against the obstacles while Harry prepared properly, or he could accelerate the timeline and resolve it on his own terms. He hadn't decided yet. He turned and found Hermione standing at the foot of the stairs in her dressing gown, arms crossed. "You're not asleep," she said. "Neither are you." She came and sat in the other window seat, tucking her feet under her. Outside, an owl crossed the dark. She looked at it, then at him. "The troll," she said. "Yes. You weren't afraid of it." "No. Not at all. Not even a little." She said this as an observation, not a challenge, and the precision of her attention, the fact that she'd noticed the specific quality of his calm rather than just the result, was one of the things Harry found most compelling about her. "It was a troll," Harry said. "It was very large and quite stupid, and its club was the biggest problem, and I removed the club." "Harry." She looked at him directly. "On the train you said you'd explain eventually. In proper context." She paused. "I think I'd like the proper context." Harry looked at her for a moment. The firelight from the dying common room fire was the only light, and it moved the shadows around the room in a way that made it feel separate from the rest of the castle. "All right," he said. He told her. Not everything, not the deepest pieces, the memories that were most Tom Riddle's and least Harry's, the things he was still sorting through himself. But the structure of it, the night the curse rebounded, the conduit, the fragments. 7 pieces of a broken soul and what happened when they poured into a child who had ancient sacrificial magic running through him like a river. He watched her face as he talked. She didn't interrupt, which was not how she usually operated, which told him she understood the gravity of what she was being given. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The memories," she said eventually. "You have his memories." "Some of them. The ones attached to the fragments. Not all of his life, it's discontinuous. More like 7 photographs of the same person at different ages. Some overlap. And the knowledge. Yes. All of it. Most of what he spent a lifetime acquiring, yes." She breathed out slowly. "And you've never used it to hurt anyone." This seemed to be the central question she'd been building toward, and he appreciated that it was a real question rather than a statement, that she was genuinely asking rather than asserting what she already believed. "No," he said. "Never. I've thought about why that is, because it seems like it should have been more complicated. The knowledge includes some terrible things. Dark magic at levels that," he paused, choosing his words, "that would terrify most adult wizards. And none of it has ever called to me as something I wanted to do. I think it's because I've always understood it completely, including the cost." Fear-driven magic extracted from a terrified person who was trying to make himself unkillable is not actually the sort of power that looks appealing when you can feel what it costs the caster. She stared at him. "You can feel it? When I look at the theory, I can see what it required to develop. What he gave up each time." Harry paused. Each Horcrux cost him a piece of himself. Not just his soul, his capacity for anything other than fear. By the end he wasn't functioning as a person. He was functioning as a survival mechanism. Hermione absorbed this. The fire popped. "What are you going to do?" she said. "About the thing in Quirrell?" "I'm thinking about it," Harry said honestly. "I know what it wants. I'm deciding when to address it." She didn't say you can't fight a fragment of Voldemort's soul at 11 years old, which he appreciated, because it would have been a statement that assumed a great deal about what 11 years old meant in his particular case. She said, instead, "Tell me when you've decided. I'd like to help." Harry looked at her, and felt the word friend arrive with a weight and solidity it had never carried before, because he'd never had one. "I will," he said. The days that followed had a quality he hadn't expected, normalcy. Not performing normalcy, actually having it. The rhythm of classes, the specific pleasure of Quidditch practice on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the common room filling with noise and fire and the comfortable proximity of people you're learning to know. Ron's laugh, which was sudden and full and had no artifice in it. Hermione's face when she grasped something new, the brief private satisfaction before she went looking for the next thing. Even the familiar and increasingly layered quality of Snape's attention, which was becoming something he couldn't quite categorize. There was a Tuesday evening in the library that mattered, 3 weeks into term. Harry was working through the Principles of Elemental Transfiguration, published 1877, out of print. He'd found it in the restricted section through the simple method of asking very politely and being very specific about his academic purposes, which had worked once and would probably not work again. He was making notes in the margin in the small precise handwriting he used when he was actually thinking, and Snape came around the shelves. He stopped when he saw Harry. Harry looked up. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Snape's eyes moved to the book, registered the title, moved to the margin notes. "That book is from the restricted section," Snape said. "The librarian gave me a pass," Harry said. "For the elemental section specifically." "Madame Pants gave you," Snape stopped. "Why?" "I asked specifically about post-1850 theoretical transfiguration with applications to elemental work and she found this in about 30 seconds. She was very helpful." He paused. "She said most students don't ask specific enough questions." Snape came closer, almost involuntarily, and looked at the margin notes with the expression of a man who can't stop his own professional interest. Harry watched him read. Watched the line between his brows deepen as he processed what he was seeing, not just notes, but actual theoretical extensions of the text's arguments, places where Harry had pushed the logic further and annotated where it broke down. "This is not first-year work," Snape said. "No," Harry agreed. "Where did you learn?" He stopped himself. Started again. "Your mother," he said, and his voice changed in a way he clearly hadn't intended, going quieter and rougher simultaneously, was exceptionally talented. Gifted in a way that had very little to do with curriculum. Harry put his quill down. This was the first time Snape had mentioned her without it being wrapped in professional distance. The rawness of it was brief and quickly suppressed, but Harry had felt it clearly. "What was she like?" Harry said. The question landed in the silence between them and Snape went still. He looked at Harry for a long moment with the expression of someone being asked to open a door they've kept shut for a very long time. "Brilliant," Snape said, finally, clipped. "Infuriating. Entirely certain she was right about everything, which was made worse by the fact that she usually was." He paused. "She would have found this entire book inadequate and said so very clearly." Harry felt the warmth at his core shift slightly, his mother's magic, that permanent anchor, and understood something about Snape that he'd only half seen before. The man was not cruel for the sake of cruelty. He was a person who had loved something and lost it and had very poor tools for managing what that had made him. "Thank you," Harry said. Snape's jaw tightened. He straightened, retreating back into the professional register. "Don't be in the restricted section after hours," he said, which was pointedly not addressing the fact that it was currently 5:30 and not remotely after hours. He left. Harry watched him go, then returned to his margin notes, and felt the warmth in his chest settle into something comfortable. He wrote, at the bottom of the page, "What my mother would have said here," and left the line blank, because he didn't know, and intended to find out. Chapter 3, What Lies Beneath the Trapdoor. November arrived at Hogwarts the way November arrives everywhere, by making you understand that October had been generous and you'd taken it for granted. The grounds went grey and the lake went the color of old pewter and the corridors got cold in a way that suggested the castle itself was conserving warmth for something it considered more important than student comfort. Harry had been spending a lot of time thinking about the third-floor corridor. Not because he didn't know what was down there, he had a reasonable picture by now, assembled from overheard conversations, the scorch marks he'd noticed near the trapdoor during the brief second-week visit when curiosity had taken him that far, and the specific quality of magical signature he could feel from 2 corridors away when the castle was quiet. The protections were real and layered, designed by people who were each excellent at one thing, which meant the system was strong at its components and potentially interesting at the joins. What he was thinking about was timing. Quirrell's urgency was building. Harry could measure it the way you measure a temperature change, nothing visible, but a shift in the air quality of every defense class, a tightening around the performance of the frightened professor routine. The fragment behind Quirrell's eyes was getting impatient. Something had told it the stone was close. It was starting to push. He was in the middle of this particular line of thought during a Quidditch practice in the 3rd week of November, hovering 60 feet above the pitch while the rest of the team ran passing drills below, and he was supposed to be watching for the practice snitch but was mostly watching the castle windows and thinking about chess. Potter. Oliver Wood's voice carried the particular quality of someone who took Quidditch with a seriousness that bordered on philosophical conviction. Snitch. Harry looked. The snitch was 8 feet to his left, hanging in the gray air with its wings making that barely audible mechanical flutter. He reached out and took it without moving from his spot, the way you take a cup from a table. Wood was quiet for a moment. Can you not do that? Do what? Just take it. Like it's nothing. The other team will think it's rigged. You want me to make it harder? I want you to at least look like you're trying, Wood said. I'll look like I'm trying, Harry said, which was a promise about performance rather than effort, and Wood seemed to understand this because he ran a hand through his hair and went back to the passing drills with the resigned expression of a man who has got exactly what he wished for and found it slightly disorienting. Harry released the snitch back into the air and watched it blur away into the gray. The castle had 14 windows lit on the 3rd floor. 3 of them he knew were staffed: McGonagall's office, a storage room that Professor Sprout used occasionally, the defense classroom. The rest were what interested him. He told Hermione about the stone that Saturday morning. They were in the library, their table, the one in the back corner behind the periodicals where nobody ever went because the Hogwarts periodicals were largely a collection of wizarding academic journals from the 1940s that smelled of mildew and strong opinions. Hermione had claimed this table in the 2nd week and Harry had arrived to find her there and sat down without discussion, and now it was their table the way things become yours without any formal agreement. Ron came on Saturdays because Hermione and Harry came on Saturdays, which he'd admitted to himself after the 3rd consecutive Saturday but not aloud. Harry told them about the stone. He laid it out economically: the vault at Gringotts, Hagrid's visit, the trapdoor, Fluffy, the layered protections he could feel from the corridor. Flamel and the stone and what the stone could do. Ron leaned back in his chair and processed this with his mouth slightly open. So what's actually down there, he said. Besides the dog. More than the dog, Harry said. Several protections, each designed by a different professor. I can feel the magical signatures from the corridor, they're distinct enough to identify partially. McGonagall's work has a specific quality. Flitwick's enchantments feel different, more layered. There's something from Sprout as well, probably herbological. He paused. And Snape. Snape's down there. Ron said, with the particular tone of someone who considers Snape's involvement in anything a complicating factor. His work is, yes. Hermione had been listening with her quill tapping against the table, which was her thinking gesture. And Quirrell, she said. Yes. He helped design one of the protections. She said it not as a question. Presumably. The fragment behind his eyes is behind the whole sequence. It was probably how Quirrell was recruited. Help design the defenses, get access to the layout, use that knowledge to navigate them from the inside. Harry paused. It's actually elegant in a frustrating sort of way. Can it get through them? Ron said. The thing in Quirrell. On its own. On its own, in its current state, it's a fragment, it's weak, it's dependent on Quirrell's body for everything physical. It can get through some of them. Maybe most of them. Harry turned his quill over in his fingers. The last protection I can't identify. There's something at the bottom that doesn't match any of the professor's signatures I know. It might be Dumbledore's own work. It might be the stone itself generating a field. Hermione was now writing something in her notebook. "We should go look," she said. Ron stared at her. "Did you just say, I said we should go look? Not get the stone. Not fight anything. Map the protections properly so we understand what we're dealing with before we need to deal with it." She looked up at Ron with the particular expression that combined absolute certainty with the awareness that reasonable people might disagree. "Quirrell is going to make a move eventually. Harry thinks so, and I trust Harry's read on this. If that happens and we have no information about what's actually down there, our options are limited." Ron looked at Harry. "She's right," Harry said. "Of course I'm right," Hermione said. "We go tonight then," Harry said. "I have an invisibility cloak." "You have a what?" they said simultaneously. The cloak had arrived in October, delivered by an anonymous owl carrying a package with no note. Harry had unwrapped it and understood immediately. The magic in it was old, and the way his mother's magic was old, deep and woven and patient, and he'd put it away and waited, because he'd known what it was from the moment he touched it, and he hadn't decided yet what to make of the fact that Dumbledore had sent it without identifying himself. Because it was obviously Dumbledore. The anonymity was its own kind of message. He told this to Hermione and Ron as they stood in the third-floor corridor at 11:30, all three of them under the cloak, which was a slightly uncomfortable fit and required Ron to keep his elbows in. "How do you know it was Dumbledore?" Ron said. "Because it was my father's. It's been in the Potter family for a long time. The only person outside the family who would know it existed and have the access to retrieve it is Dumbledore." Harry turned the corridor quietly, moving toward the door at the end. "He sent it because he wants me curious. Or because he wants me prepared. Possibly both. Or because he genuinely just wanted you to have it," Hermione said. "Also possible," Harry allowed, though he wasn't sure he believed it. There was something about Dumbledore's attentions that had the quality of planned generosity, which was generosity but not entirely uncalculated. He opened the third-floor door. Fluffy was asleep. More specifically, Fluffy was asleep because the harp in the corner was still playing, a small, enchanted instrument that had almost wound down, its music slow and sparse but enough. Three enormous heads, each as large as a car bonnet, rested on enormous paws, each breathing with the slow authority of something deeply under. The trapdoor was visible between two of the front paws. "Oh," Ron said softly, which covered the situation adequately. Harry moved through the room with the precise care of someone who understood that the geometry of the problem was straightforward. The harp needed to keep playing, the trapdoor needed to be reached, and nothing in between those two objectives should change. He took his wand and sent a gentle, steady wave of the same magic the harp was producing, not music exactly, more the magical equivalent of music, the specific sleep induction frequency at the core of the charm, and the harp could fall silent now without consequence. It wound down. Fluffy breathed on. Harry opened the trapdoor and looked down. Dark, and a long way down, and the smell of earth and something herbal. "Something soft to land on," Hermione said, having looked over his shoulder. "Plant-based," Harry said. "Sprout section." He looked at Ron. "When we go through, go limp. Fighting it makes it worse." "You've read about Devil's Snare," Ron said. "No, I just know about it." He paused. "Jump when ready." They went through. The Devil's Snare reacted to their arrival with the vigorous enthusiasm of a plant that has been sitting in the dark waiting for something to strangle, wrapping around Harry's legs before he'd finished landing. He stayed still, let it hold him for a moment, and then applied a steady warmth through his hands without using his wand, sunlight equivalent, the magical signal the plant was most averse to, and the tendrils retreated like water from a hot surface. Hermione was already free, she'd used Lumos and the snare had recoiled. Ron had panicked briefly and then remembered Hermione explaining Devil's Snare during a herbology session and gone still, which was enough. They stood in a stone chamber that smelled of damp and growing things, a faint green luminescence from the snare overhead. Next, Harry said. The second chamber held something flying. The sound reached them first, a rushing, papery sound like many small wings, and then the door opened on a high stone room in which hundreds of keys flew in dense, chaotic spirals around a single broomstick. On the far side, a locked door, and in the keyhole the size of the key that would open it clearly visible even from here. Ron found the broomstick first, mounting it with the ease of someone who'd grown up flying. I can spot it, he said, and went up. Harry stood below and watched the key patterns. They weren't random, the flight paths had an underlying structure, a spell architecture designed to make the correct key look like every other key while actually being subtly different. Wingardium was too imprecise for something this fast. He needed to stop it specifically. Ron, he said. 3 o'clock from you, the damaged wing. Ron looked. Found it. Cut left and drove for it with the focus of someone who had spent half his childhood chasing his brothers on brooms in the back garden, and the key jinked and dodged, but Ron's instincts were genuinely excellent and he had it inside 10 seconds, coming back down with it clutched in his fist and slightly flushed with the effort. Good flying, Harry said, and meant it simply. Ron grinned. Third chamber, a chessboard. Enormous pieces, each the height of an adult, carved from stone and marble, facing each other across a floor tiled in black and white squares. On the other side of the board, another door. Ron looked at it. His face changed into an expression Harry hadn't seen before, focused and still and entirely competent. The expression of someone who has found the specific room where they belong. I know this, Ron said. I thought you might, Harry said. Ron walked the edge of the board, reading the positions. He was quiet for 3 minutes, not fidgeting, not speaking, just thinking, and then he began to move pieces with a calm authority that Harry found genuinely impressive, because the scale of the thing should have been overwhelming and Ron was treating it like a Tuesday. He used himself as a piece. Knight. Harry didn't argue with this, it was tactically sound, the knight's movement pattern giving the most flexibility in the mid-game. The game lasted 9 minutes. Harry watched and tracked the lines, saw 3 possible interventions where his own position could be used, said none of them because they weren't needed and also because it was clearly Ron's to play. The White Queen moved against a bishop, and the path cleared. Ron, Harry said. Ron stepped off the board. My brothers are going to be insufferable when they find out I played chess against enchanted pieces and won, he said. They might not find out immediately, Hermione said. That's worse, Ron said. I'll have to not say anything and knowing will eat me alive. Hermione's mouth did its involuntary thing where she tried not to smile and mostly failed. Fourth chamber, a troll. Already unconscious, which saved time. Harry glanced at it and moved on. Fifth chamber, flames, purple on one side and black on the other, and on a table in the center a logic puzzle. A set of bottles and a riddle written on a scroll. Hermione read it once and solved it in 90 seconds. Smallest bottle, she said. Goes forward. The round one is the one that takes you back. Harry picked up the smallest bottle and examined the contents. Genuinely good work, the potion was compressed cold, the magical signature clean, not a single shortcut taken in the brewing. He turned to Hermione and Ron. One person through, he said. Enough for one. Harry, Hermione said. Yes. It has to be you. She said it simply. We both know that. He looked at them, Hermione with her arms crossed and her jaw set in the expression that meant she'd made a decision and it was final, Ron with his hands in his pockets and a look on his face that was somewhere between worried and absolutely convinced. Go back and wait, Harry said. Both of you. If I'm not back by morning, send an owl to Dumbledore directly. Use my name and say the 3rd floor corridor. He'll understand. Harry, Ron said. I'll be fine, Harry said, which was not bravado. It was a statement of assessment. Ron looked at him for a long moment. I know, he said. That's sort of the thing, isn't it? I know you'll be fine. I just don't love the part where you're down there alone. Something about that hit Harry in a way he hadn't expected. He looked at Ron, and the warmth he felt was entirely his own, not borrowed from any fragment of anyone else. Thank you, he said. He drank the potion and stepped through the black flames. The final chamber was vast and quiet and lit by torches that cast long shadows across a floor of polished black stone. At the center was a plinth, and on the plinth was a mirror. The mirror of Erist. Harry stopped when he saw it. He'd known it was here. Dumbledore had moved it from wherever it had been stored, because the protection it offered was specific and peculiar and genuinely difficult to circumvent. Only someone who wanted the stone but not to use it could retrieve it from the mirror. Someone who wanted to use it would see themselves using it, and that was not the same as having it. He walked toward it. The surface of the mirror was dark and still, and then it resolved, as it always resolved, working from the deepest want and showing it without mercy, and Harry looked at what it showed him. He'd thought, carefully, about what he would see. He'd considered it the way he considered most things, systematically, with attention to the emotional architecture underneath the expectation. He had 7 lifetimes of damaged wanting inside him and his own 11 years of cupboard and Dursley's and very little warmth, and the mirror saw all of that and showed him, his mother. Not dead. Not the photograph, not the second-hand memory of someone else's recollection. Standing beside his father, who had his glasses and his hair and the laugh lines Harry could trace in his own face when he looked in normal mirrors, and they were looking at him with an expression that required no translation at all. He stood there with his hands at his sides and felt something move through him that had no name he'd found yet. Not grief. He'd known grief, processed it intellectually, understood it as the cost of caring. This was something older and simpler. The one at the bottom of everything, under all the knowledge and the power and the careful cataloging, the thing that the cupboard under the stairs had made, a boy who wanted to be seen by his parents. He stood with it for a moment. He let himself have it, which was something he was still learning, the capacity to feel something fully without immediately sorting it into useful and useless and filing the useless away. Then he stepped in front of the mirror properly and looked into his own pocket. The stone was there. Cool and red-veined, the size of a large plum, sitting in his palm with the quiet self-possession of something that had been waiting to be found by the right person. He pocketed it. Interesting choice of protection, a voice said behind him. Not Quirrell's voice. Well, Quirrell's mouth. But the voice had no stutter in it, no performance, no frightened professor draped around the edges. It was something older and colder and entirely awake. Harry turned. Quirrell stood in the doorway of the chamber, and the person standing in Quirrell's skin was visible now in a way that the performance had always obscured, straight-backed, still, the eyes carrying something that was almost entirely appetite. Behind him, the black flames had parted to let him through. Whatever had suppressed them was powerful and recent. Harry Potter, the voice said. Hello, Harry said. The thing wearing Quirrell's face studied him with the fixed assessment of a predator and something else, something that was almost recognition, but wrong, like seeing a word in a language you used to speak. I have felt you, it said. Since September. A familiar resonance. The word came out with faint distaste. My magic. Inside you. Yes, Harry said. Give me the stone. No. The flatness of it, the complete absence of fear or negotiation, made Quirrell's face do something complicated. The thing inside recalibrated. You are 11 years old, it said. Also yes, Harry said. I can offer you, don't, Harry said, not unkindly. I know every offer you're going to make before you make it. I know what you wanted for yourself when you were younger, and I know what that wanting cost you, and I know what you are now. The offer isn't interesting. Quirrell's face went very still. What am I now? It said, and there was something in the question, a sliver of something raw and real under the coldness, that Harry recognized, because he'd spent a long time in those memories. A fragment, Harry said. The thinnest part of something that used to be extraordinary. And you know it. The air in the chamber changed quality. The torches guttered. Something that was not quite wind moved through the room, and Harry felt the pressure of it, a magical force that was substantial even in its diminished state, the raw atmospheric weight of a powerful will being applied. "Give me the stone," the voice said again, and this time the air moved with it, a visible distortion. Harry stood where he was. He pushed back. Not with a spell, not with anything that had a name or a wand motion. He simply let what he was fill the space it occupied, the full weight of 7 integrated souls and 11 years of his mother's anchored love and the particular quality of a magical core that had been described by Ollivander with a single word, extraordinary. He let it be present in the room the way a mountain is present in a valley, without effort or performance, simply a fact. The distortion stopped. Quirrell's face went through something very fast, shock, then a confusion that was close to recognition, then something Harry identified from the deepest memories as a thing Tom Riddle had felt very rarely, genuine uncertainty. "What are you?" it said. "Something you helped make," Harry said. Which is possibly the most ironic thing about this entire situation. What happened next, Harry would later describe to Hermione and Ron as happening in 2 distinct phases, the first of which he had control over and the second of which was interesting. The first, Quirrell attacked. He was good. The fragment of soul animating him had accumulated decades of dark magical knowledge and Quirrell's body had been practicing since September. The curses came fast and layered, designed to compress the reaction space, a binding jinx and a killing curse attempted simultaneously, which was technically impressive if you could ignore the moral dimension. Harry moved through the binding jinx the way you move through water when you know it's coming, not by being faster but by being in a different place before the spell arrived. His understanding of curse trajectories was, courtesy of Tom Riddle's decades of practice, comprehensive. He knew where the magic was going before it was fully cast. The killing curse he deflected. Not with a shield, shields don't stop the killing curse, it wasn't possible to directly block it. He moved the air and the magical field around it using a technique that had no official name and was the kind of thing people had theorized about in margins of obscure texts and Harry had developed from those theories into something functional. The green light hit the far wall and the stone it touched went gray and dead. "Impressive," the voice in Quirrell said. "You taught me," Harry said. Obliquely. Phase 2, Harry grabbed Quirrell's arm. This was not part of the plan. The plan had been containment and negotiation toward a resolution that left Quirrell alive and the fragment weakened. But Quirrell lunged for Harry's pocket, for the stone, and Harry's instinct was to catch the wrist, and the moment skin met skin the result was immediate and overwhelming and not something Harry had been fully prepared for. His mother's magic met the fragment of Voldemort's soul with the force of a wave meeting a rock face. The sacrifice protection, embedded in Harry's blood and bone by the most ancient magic in existence, was not a shield. It was an antithesis. It was the exact opposite of whatever had made Voldemort Voldemort, and when it came into contact with a piece of that soul at skin distance, it didn't fight it. It burned it. Clean and immediate and absolute, the way sunlight burns mist. Quirrell screamed. The skin where Harry held his wrist was going white, then gray, then crumbling, and the process was moving up the arm and Harry held on because the alternative was releasing him and the fragment would survive and this needed to end, it needed to end now, it needed to end completely. "Let go," the voice said, and it was different now, thinner, stripped of the performance, genuinely afraid for the first time, and Harry recognized fear in a Tom Riddle voice the way you recognize a word in a language you spent years learning. "No," Harry said, softly. "I'm sorry. But no." The fragment fought. It was not nothing, even diminished, even trapped in a crumbling vessel, it threw everything it had. The air went black. Spells Harry had no names for crackled off Quirrell's body. The room shook. Harry held on. The stone sat in his pocket and pulsed warmth against his hip like a slow heartbeat. What dissolved first was the fragment's coherence, the thing it was using to function, the organizational structure of a consciousness trying to maintain itself against the dissolving pressure of sacrificial magic applied directly to a soul piece. Then the attack fell apart. Then the cold left the room. Quirrell fell, and what remained when he hit the stone floor was a man, just a man, frightened and broken and blinking at the torchlight, and the thing that had been riding him for most of a year had gone. Harry crouched beside Quirrell and checked his pulse. Rapid, shallow, alive. "Stay still," Harry said. "Someone will come." Quirrell looked up at him with eyes that were clearing, the specific clarity of someone being returned to their own mind after a long absence. "It's gone," he said. His voice was his own. "I can't feel it anymore." "Yes," Harry said. "It's been there since Albania," Quirrell said, and his voice broke on this. "Since Albania, it's been, I couldn't think without it in the way, I couldn't," he stopped. "I didn't want to. Any of it. I want you to know that." "I know," Harry said. He meant it. He'd been inside those memories, the specific horror of a fragmentary possession, a consciousness forced to cohabit with something hungry and cold. "I know, Quirinus." He stood up and stepped back, and the stone in his pocket was warm and still and the chamber was quiet. Dumbledore arrived 6 minutes later. He came through the black flames with his robes gathered in one hand and his wand in the other, moving fast for a man his age, and he stopped when he saw the scene, Quirrell on the floor and Harry standing beside him and the chamber otherwise exactly as it had been arranged. He looked at Harry for a long moment. Harry met his eyes. Not challenging, not hiding. Just meeting. "The stone?" Dumbledore said. Harry reached into his pocket and held it out. Dumbledore took it and closed his hand around it and his face did something complex, relief in it, yes, and surprise, but also something else that Harry had seen on Snape's face and Flitwick's face and McGonagall's face when they encountered him doing something that violated their framework. The expression of someone revising a document they thought was finished. "Quirrell is alive," Harry said. "The fragment is destroyed. He'll need care, a year of partial possession is not nothing." "No," Dumbledore agreed. "It is not." He knelt beside Quirrell and began a quiet assessment spell, and Harry watched his hands work and noted the quality of his technique, exceptional, as expected, precise and thorough. This was a man whose magical skill was entirely real and not remotely mythological. When he straightened, he looked at Harry again with that same complex expression. "How long have you known?" Dumbledore said. "About the stone." "Since September." "About what was in Quirrell?" "Since the platform." "And you waited?" "I was gathering information," Harry said. "And I wanted to see what the protections were. And," he paused, choosing honesty over diplomacy. "I wanted to see what you would do. When you knew." Dumbledore's expression settled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And what have you concluded?" "That you're very good at watching and very good at planning and that your plans involve more people than you usually tell those people about." He said this without heat. "I'd like to change that. At least where I'm concerned." The old man looked at him for what felt like a very long time. "You've known from the beginning," Dumbledore said. "Not guessed." "Known. About the stone, about Quirrell, about yourself." He turned the stone in his hands. "How much, Harry?" "Enough," Harry said. "I'll tell you the rest when we have more time." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "Nicholas Flamel will want to know his stone is safe," he said. "Is he?" Harry said. "Knowing the stone's destroyed is probably the healthier option." Dumbledore's eyes, which had been sharp and intent behind the half-moon glasses, went very still. "You think the stone should be destroyed?" "I think an object that creates the conditions for this," Harry gestured at the chamber, at Quirrell, at the elaborate and still partially functional obstacle course beneath the school, is not worth the alternative. He paused. "Flamel has had 600 years. That's not nothing. And everything that continues to exist continues to be a target. The silence was long. "Nicholas is my friend," Dumbledore said. "I know," Harry said. "I'm sorry. It's still true." Dumbledore looked at him, and the expression on his face was one Harry hadn't seen from him before, not the twinkling benignity and not the focused strategic intelligence and not the grief he kept well buried under both of those, but something older than all of them. The look of a man recognizing that the person in front of him is not who he thought he was dealing with. "You are not what I expected," Dumbledore said, very quietly. "No," Harry said. "I don't think I am." He came out of the trapdoor at 2:15 in the morning. Hermione was sitting against the wall outside the third-floor door with her arms wrapped around her knees and a book open in her lap that she had clearly not been reading. Ron was asleep against the opposite wall, head tilted back, snoring quietly. Hermione looked up when she heard Harry's footsteps and her face went through three things in rapid sequence: the relief, then the assessment, then the specific expression she wore when she was trying to determine exactly what had happened from the evidence of how he looked. "You're fine," she said. "Yes." "Quirrell?" "Alive." "Dumbledore's with him." "The stone?" "With Dumbledore." She closed the book. "And the fragment of Voldemort?" Harry was quiet for a moment. He sat down on the floor beside them, the cold stone corridor, the distant sounds of a castle settling at night, and leaned his back against the wall. "Gone," he said. Hermione breathed out. She reached over and took his hand, not in a romantic way but in the very specific way of someone who has been extremely worried for several hours and needs to know through touch that the person they were worried about is real and present and whole. Harry let her. Ron snorted awake. "Was it?" He blinked, found Harry, and the relief on his face was so immediate and unguarded it was almost funny. "Oh. Good." He rubbed his eye. "Did you get it? The stone's with Dumbledore. Voldemort? Gone." Ron was quiet. Then, "Brilliant," he said, with the understated satisfaction of someone who means it completely and has no further notes. "I need to tell you something," Harry said. He was looking at the ceiling, at the stone arch above them. "About what happened down there. The stone, Dumbledore is going to destroy it. Probably. I told him he should." "Nicholas Flamel," Hermione said, catching the implication immediately. "Yes." She processed this. "He'll die," she said. "Eventually." "Yes." Harry paused. "He's 665 years old, Hermione." She was quiet for a moment. "That doesn't make it, no," Harry agreed. "It doesn't make it easy. It just makes it right." Ron was looking between them. "So Voldemort's actually gone? Really gone? Not just hiding somewhere again?" Harry thought about this carefully. What he'd felt when the fragment burned, the dissolution of it, the specific sensation of a soul piece being unmade. It was gone, completely. But Tom Riddle's soul was not simple arithmetic, it had been divided into more pieces than the ones here, more pieces than Quirrell, more than what had poured into Harry on the night of the curse. Voldemort was not gone. He was diminished. Significantly. But somewhere, thin as smoke, attached to something he'd hidden, the rest of him persisted. He had not told Dumbledore this. Not tonight. Tonight had been enough. "The piece that was here is gone," Harry said. "He won't be coming back through the same door." Ron seemed to find this acceptable, and lay back down against the wall and was asleep again within approximately 90 seconds, which Harry found both endearing and slightly enviable. Hermione was still holding his hand. "You saw something in the mirror," she said. "Didn't you?" "Yes." "You don't have to tell me what." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "My parents." Looking at me. She didn't say anything. She just held his hand. He said, "The deepest one I have, apparently, is for them to see me. Not what I can do. Just, me." "I see you," she said, simply, without decoration. Harry looked at her. "I know you do," he said. The corridor was cold and Ron was snoring, and somewhere in the castle Dumbledore was sitting with the stone and Quirrell and 11 years of plans that had just been rerouted, and Harry sat in the quiet and let himself have this too, this uncomplicated warmth, this particular November night, 3 people against a cold wall who had gone into something together and come back from it. It was, he thought, an excellent thing to have. Chapter 4, The Shape of Power. December came in hard, all sleet and stripped trees, and Hogwarts wrapped itself in fire and candlelight the way it always did when the weather made demands, hearths blazing in every common room, the great hall warm enough that the enchanted ceiling showed clouds rather than stars, the corridors smelling of pine and something faintly cinnamon that drifted from the kitchens on weekend mornings. Harry had been called to Dumbledore's office twice since the night in the chamber. The first time was 3 days after, when Quirrell had been moved to St. Mungo's and the story had been officially distributed, a professor's confrontation with a dark entity, the stone secured, details not for general circulation. Harry had sat across the great desk from Dumbledore and they'd talked for 2 hours, carefully, like 2 people working out the terms of something that didn't have an existing template. Harry had told him the structural truth, the fragments, the night of the curse, the 10 years of sorting. He'd left out the depth of what he'd retained from the memories, and he'd left out his read on Voldemort's continued existence elsewhere, because he wanted to understand Dumbledore's information before he shared his own. Dumbledore had listened with a quality of attention that was different from most people's attention, deeper and more still, the listening of someone who was also processing and filing and connecting in real time. Occasionally he asked a question that was precise enough to tell Harry exactly where the old man's thinking was. At the end of the 2 hours, Dumbledore had said, "You are the most remarkable person I have met in a very long time." Harry had said, "You've been managing me." Not accusatorially. Just as a fact. Dumbledore had looked at him over the half-moon spectacles. "Yes," he said. "I have." He said this with the honesty of a man who had decided that a particular kind of pretense was no longer available to him. "From the moment I left you at Privet Drive. The invisibility cloak. The positioning of the stone. You wanted me near it," Harry said. "Close enough to be drawn in if Quirrell made his move." "I wanted you prepared," Dumbledore said. "I had hoped, I confess I had arranged, for you to encounter the stone as part of your education. To face what you might face and discover your own capacities in a controlled environment." "Controlled by you," Harry said. "Yes." A pause. "You are not angry." "I'm noting it," Harry said. For future reference. The second meeting had been the following week and was shorter and different in character, Dumbledore asking about Harry's well-being with a genuine warmth that was not political, not strategic, just the care of an old man for a boy he'd failed to properly see until recently. Harry answered honestly and watched the old man's face, and thought, he loves people. He's also entirely capable of using them. Both things are completely real and he doesn't resolve the contradiction because he can't. He'd left the second meeting with more respect for Dumbledore and a clearer understanding of exactly where the lines were. The night before the students left for Christmas holidays, Harry sat in the common room and wrote a letter. He wrote to Nicholas Flamel. He'd asked Dumbledore for the address and Dumbledore had given it after a pause that was about 3 seconds longer than a pause should be, which told Harry he'd been surprised and was deciding whether the surprise was welcome. Harry had taken the address and said nothing about his reasons, and Dumbledore had said nothing either, and both of them had understood the other. The letter was 2 pages. He wrote it in French because Flamel was French and because making an old man read English when you're asking something difficult of him was unnecessarily rude. He explained who he was with economy. He explained what had happened to the stone with equal economy. And then he wrote, carefully, what he thought, that a life of 665 years was a thing of extraordinary value, that the work Flamel had done across those centuries was real and remarkable, and that the stone's destruction was necessary not because Flamel's life didn't matter but because the alternative was a world in which this particular night would happen again, and again, until someone less fortunate than Harry was standing in that chamber. He wrote, I am sorry. I think you already know this. I think a man who has spent 6 centuries thinking about the nature of life and death has probably reached his own conclusions about what the stone represents, and I suspect those conclusions are not entirely comfortable ones. You don't have to agree with me. But I wanted to make the argument directly rather than let it be made by someone else on your behalf. He sealed it and sent it with his owl, a handsome tawny bird he'd acquired through Elops on a Saturday trip to Hogsmeade that McGonagall had permitted on the grounds that he'd looked at her with the patient certainty of someone for whom the word, no, was a delay rather than an answer. The common room was warm and loud around him, third years playing Exploding Snap, a pair of second-year girls doing homework with aggressive efficiency, the twins staging what appeared to be a controlled experiment involving a fanged frisbee and a suit of armor visible through the portrait hole. Ron was playing chess with himself on the hearth rug, which was the way he practiced, running both sides simultaneously with equal commitment, which struck Harry as both eccentric and deeply useful. Hermione was beside Harry on the sofa, reading. She read the way she did everything, completely, bringing her whole self to it. She was working through a book Harry had recommended 2 weeks ago, Theoretical Frameworks in Magical Inheritance, and had reached the chapter on soul magic, which he knew because she'd been quiet for 45 minutes, which meant either she was very focused or she'd read something that required processing. Ask, Harry said. I haven't said anything, she said. You've been on page 212 for 45 minutes. She looked at him. Then at the page. Then back. Soul magic, she said. The theory of fragmentation. Yes. Riddle split his soul 7 times. The book says each split requires a murder, that the act of deliberate killing tears the soul and the resulting piece can be anchored to an object. She paused. But you have all 7 fragments. Yes. Which means, 7 murders. 7 acts of violence that each tore off a piece of the soul you're now carrying. Harry had thought about this. He'd thought about it very carefully, because it was the part of his situation that required the most care, the origin of the knowledge he carried. The fragments are the pieces, not the acts, he said. I have his memories of those acts, which is different from having committed them. The knowledge of how to do terrible things is not the same as having done them. But you can feel it, she said. Can't you? In the memories. Yes, he said, honestly. She put the book down on her knees and looked at him with the full weight of her attention, the kind she brought to things she genuinely needed to understand. What's that like? Knowing what it felt like for him to do those things. Harry was quiet for a moment. Like reading a history of something atrocious written by the person who committed it. You understand the logic they were using. You understand the specific quality of what they told themselves in the moment. It doesn't make it less atrocious. It makes it more so, because you can see exactly where the road forked and the specific moment they chose the wrong direction. Hermione looked at him steadily. And you've never been tempted by any of it? The magic? Sometimes, Harry said. There are techniques in what I carry that are extraordinary. Dark, but extraordinary. The engineering of some of it is genuinely, it's fascinating in the way that a very clever dangerous machine is fascinating. He paused. I've never been tempted to use them on someone. That's different. She seemed to accept this. She was quiet for a moment. Ron, she said, looking toward the hearthrug. Ron moved his black queen with a gesture that was both economical and devastating. Heard it all, he said. Still not worried. You're the least scary powerful person I've ever met. He paused. You're also the only powerful person I've ever met, to be fair. You've met Dumbledore, Harry said. Dumbledore's scary, Ron said. Different kind of thing. Hermione picked her book back up. I'm going to keep reading, she said. I have 47 questions. I'll answer all 47, Harry said. Tonight? If you want. She looked at him sideways with the small private expression that he'd learned meant she was pleased about something she hadn't expected to be pleased about. Good, she said. Most of Gryffindor went home for Christmas. Harry stayed. He stayed because Privet Drive was not home and the Dursleys were not family in any sense that mattered, and Hogwarts in winter was the most beautiful thing he'd seen with his own eyes rather than through someone else's memory, and because Ron stayed, and because there were things he wanted to do with the quiet of a half-empty castle. Ron stayed because he said his mum would send food anyway and the castle was quieter without his brothers, which Harry suspected was approximately half the truth and the other half was that Harry was staying and Ron had decided sometime in October that where Harry went, he went, not out of obligation but with the specific loyalty of someone who has decided a person is worth the effort. Christmas morning arrived with presents. Harry received a green sweater from Molly Weasley, knitted with an H on the front, along with what appeared to be half a cauldron's worth of fudge, a copy of Advanced Potion Theory, Post-Standardization Techniques from Hermione with a note saying she'd ordered it from France which was the only place it was in print, a small folded parchment from Snape containing, with no greeting or signature, a list of 7 reference texts with annotations in the margins indicating which chapters were most relevant to something. Harry examined the list for a long time. Each text was on potions theory at a level 3 or 4 years beyond his curriculum. The annotations were specific, not just read this but pay attention to the argument on distillation in Chapter 5, the things that last spring came to Hogwarts the way it always did, grudgingly at first, the ground still frost-pale in the mornings, and then one week in April where the temperature climbed 10 degrees in 4 days and suddenly the grounds were green and the lake was brilliant and the students were horizontal on the grass like they'd been waiting for permission to exist. Outdoors. Harry spent a lot of that first warm week outside. He sat by the lake in the mornings before breakfast and thought, which was his most productive state, not reading, not practicing, just turning things over with the quiet that the outdoors provided. The giant squid occasionally surfaced near the bank, an enormous thoughtful presence that Harry found he liked without being able to fully explain why. It asked nothing. It simply was. He was thinking about what came next. The immediate crisis, Quirrell, the stone, the fragment, was resolved. Voldemort's presence at Hogwarts was gone. But Harry had spent enough time in the relevant memories to know the shape of the larger architecture, and the larger architecture was not resolved. It was simply quiet. Voldemort's soul was not contained in the fragment that had been destroyed. Harry had known this since October and had told Dumbledore in February, in their third private meeting, a conversation that had lasted 4 hours and ranged across more territory than any conversation Harry had previously had. He'd told Dumbledore about the Horcruxes, not all the details of how he knew, but the structural fact, that Voldemort had made them, multiple, and that they still existed somewhere. Dumbledore had gone very still. How many, he'd said. 6, originally. The fragment that was in me brought the total to 7, but that fragment is gone. Harry had been precise about this. 5 remain. Possibly 6, I'm not certain about one of them. Dumbledore had sat with this for a long time. When he spoke again he'd asked 3 specific questions that told Harry the old man was already running lines of investigation, already positioning pieces on a board that now had new information to organize around. The conversation had ended with Dumbledore saying, "I need time to think." Of course, Harry had said. I'd suggest starting with things that were close to him. Objects with personal significance. He understood power through ownership, he thought owning something made him more real. Dumbledore had looked at him with the expression Harry was becoming familiar with, the one that combined genuine admiration with something that was almost grief. You know him very well. I know what he was afraid of, Harry said. That's most of knowing someone. Now he sat by the lake and watched the squid and thought about what the second year would bring and the third and the years after that. The Horcruxes would have to be found and destroyed and that was not the work of an 11-year-old regardless of what the 11-year-old contained, but it was also not work that could be done in ignorance, and Dumbledore would need all of Harry's knowledge at some point and Harry was gradually making that knowledge available in the way you calibrate a dose, enough to be effective, not so much at once that it became overwhelming. He was also thinking about something else entirely. He'd been thinking about Hermione's paper. She'd been writing it since February, the document she'd described as for me and for you, and he'd been aware of its existence in the way you're aware of something being built nearby, the occasional question over breakfast that was more specific than a casual question, the way she sometimes looked at him with the focused assessment of someone doing primary research. 2 weeks ago she'd asked if she could show him a draft. He'd said yes. He hadn't read it yet. It was sitting in his notebook, folded, and he'd been leaving it there with the specific restraint of someone saving something they expect to be significant. He took it out now. She'd written 43 pages in a hand so small and precise that it was essentially typeset. She'd organized it as a proper academic paper: introduction, methodology, findings, analysis, conclusion, but the language wasn't academic in the dry sense. It was thorough and rigorous, and also, underneath the structure, unmistakably her voice. The introduction framed the question: what is the psychological and magical impact on a developing consciousness that absorbs multiple fractured soul pieces in infancy, and what does the subsequent development of that consciousness tell us about the relationship between power, knowledge, and character? The findings section was the most careful. She'd interviewed Harry, the 47 questions, and the later revised 47, and she'd cross-referenced his answers against everything she could find on soul magic, magical inheritance, the theory of core development, and the historical record of powerful magical practitioners. She'd built a picture from the evidence with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understood that argument only works when the foundation is solid. The analysis section was what stopped him. She wrote, "The subject's most remarkable quality is not his power, which is extraordinary, nor his knowledge, which is unprecedented for his age. It is the quality of his judgment. He has access to the most comprehensive record of what fear-driven power produces that any living person has ever had. He carries the memories and knowledge of the most feared dark wizard of the century, including the full arc of what that wizard's choices cost him. And his response to this inheritance is not mimicry, not rejection, but something more sophisticated: integration. He has absorbed the information and used it to understand the shape of the road not taken with a clarity that most people never achieve because most people never have access to that level of example. He is not good because goodness was easy for him. He is good because he understood, at a level of granular, biographical detail, precisely what the alternative looked like, and found it insufficient." Harry read this paragraph 3 times. He folded the paper and put it back in his notebook and sat by the lake for a while longer. The thing she'd done was give him a frame for something he'd been carrying without a frame. He'd known the shape of his own experience, he'd been sorting through it for 10 years, but to see it written by someone who had observed him from the outside and reached the same conclusion he'd privately reached about himself was a different kind of thing. It had a weight that the private version didn't. He thought, "She sees me more clearly than I see myself, and she's not afraid of what she sees." He thought, that is an extraordinary thing to have. He went back up to the castle to find her and say so. She was in the library, which was where she always was at 10 in the morning on a Sunday. He sat down across from her and she looked up from what she was reading and saw something in his face and put her book down. "You read it," she said. "Yes." She waited, which was unusual. Hermione's default was to fill silences rather than hold them, but she'd learned, around him, that the pause before he spoke was usually the pause of someone finding the precise thing rather than the approximate thing. "The analysis section," Harry said. "Yes," she said, carefully. "The paragraph about judgment." He paused. "You wrote that I'm good because I understood the alternative with biographical clarity." "Yes," she said again. "That's the most accurate description of it I've ever encountered," he said. "I've been trying to articulate why the knowledge didn't, why it didn't pull me sideways. And that's it. That's the shape of it." Her expression did something small and complicated. "I wanted to get it right," she said. "You got it right." She nodded, once, and the slight tension she'd been carrying since she handed him the draft released visibly. "I spent a long time on that paragraph," she admitted. "I rewrote it 8 times. "It shows," Harry said. She looked at him. "Meaning?" "Meaning you can feel it's the right version. The 8th draft has a quality the first 7 didn't." He paused. "What made you decide to write it?" She thought about this. "Because you're going to matter," she said, simply. In the world. In whatever's coming. And most people who are going to matter in the world have books written about them after the fact by people who never knew them. I wanted to write something about you while I know you, and while I can ask you directly. Harry looked at her for a long moment. The library was quiet around them, the morning light through the high windows bright and specific. Hermione, he said. What? You know I don't say things I don't mean. I know, she said, slightly wary in the way she was wary when she wasn't sure what was coming. You are the most remarkable person I've met, he said. And I've met Dumbledore, and Nicholas Flamel by correspondence, and I have the memories of a man who met everyone worth meeting for 60 years. She went very still. She started. True, he said. That's what it is. She looked at the table. Then at her hands. Then at him, and her expression was doing several things at once, the pleased thing and the uncertain thing and the thing underneath both of those that was simpler and less composed. Don't make me emotional in the library, she said. I'm supposed to be working. All right, he said, and picked up her book from where she'd set it and glanced at the title. Advanced Magical Theory, Comparative Frameworks. He opened it to her page and handed it back. Work, then. She took the book and looked at him with an expression that he'd learned to read, the one that was specifically his, that didn't appear when she was with Ron or other people, the particular quality of her attention when she was looking at him rather than looking at the subject of their conversation. Thank you, she said. For reading it. Thank you for writing it, he said. She went back to her book. He opened his notebook. They sat in the library in the Sunday morning light and worked, and didn't need to say anything else, and didn't. Ron found him on the Quidditch pitch on a Tuesday afternoon in April, during the window between the end of classes and dinner when Harry usually flew alone. He landed when he saw Ron sitting in the front row of the stands, which was not where Ron usually sat because Ron didn't usually watch practice. Ron had his elbows on his knees and the expression of someone working up to saying something. Harry sat beside him. My mum wants to invite you for the summer, Ron said. Harry looked at him. The Burrow, Ron said. If you want. The whole summer, or part of it, whatever. She wrote me about it last week. He paused. She said any friend of mine who spent Christmas at school rather than go home to family has a standing invitation, which is technically not mentioning you by name but we both know. Harry had a clear picture of the Burrow from an evening conversation with Ron in October, a house that shouldn't stand but did by force of magical personality, more children than rooms, a garden that grew whatever it wanted rather than what was planted, the smell of something baking existing in a kind of permanent ambient state. He'd wanted to see it from the moment Ron described it with the unconscious love of someone who doesn't know they're describing love because they've never experienced the alternative. I'd like that, Harry said. Very much. Ron's face broke into the sudden wide grin that was one of his better features. Good, he said. The twins will be unbearable about it but that's the regular situation. I can handle the twins, Harry said. Everyone thinks that before they've been subjected to them for more than a week, Ron said. Ron, Harry said. Yeah. Thank you, Harry said. He paused, trying to find the right framing. For treating me like someone you just met and liked, rather than someone you'd heard about. Ron looked at him with a slightly surprised expression. You were helping someone with their barrier on the platform, he said. That's all I needed to know, really. He paused. Plus you immediately sat with us on the train and didn't do any of the famous person thing. What thing? The expecting thing, Ron said. Here I am, arrange yourselves accordingly. Some people do that without knowing they do it. He shrugged. You just sat down and had a conversation. Like a normal person. I am a normal person, Harry said. Ron looked at him with the particular expression he wore when Harry said something that was true in a very specific way but also kind of hilarious. Mate, he said. Harry smiled. They sat on the pitch as the afternoon light went gold and the grass moved in the April wind, and the castle caught the light with the specific quality of old stone that had seen centuries of exactly this. Chess. Harry said. I've already won in my head, Ron said. But yes. The second Quidditch match of the season came in late April against Hufflepuff, and if the Slytherin match had been about geometry, this one was about the weather. It rained. Not the polite drizzle that English weather usually offered as its baseline, the enthusiastic, committed rain of a sky that has decided it has a point to make. The pitch was soaked and the wind was coming from two directions simultaneously, which was meteorologically interesting and practically miserable. Harry was soaked through within 30 seconds and didn't particularly mind. He went up high and let the rain hit him and found the pitch with all its miserable weather to be a place of very focused clarity. The Hufflepuff seeker, a steady fourth year named Summerby who was technically competent and had the advantage of 3 years on a broom over Harry's 7 months, went wide to stay out of the worst of the wind, which was sensible but sacrificed altitude. Harry went into the wind. Not against it, he understood that you didn't fight weather, you used it. He climbed into the worst of the gusts and let the broom find its relationship with the current and used the added speed of the crosswind to cover the pitch in fractions of the time it would have taken in calm. He was soaked and fast and entirely alive in the specific way that flying in bad weather made him feel, and the snitch when it appeared was 20 feet to his left just above the level of the stands, and he hit it with his fingertips at full speed and pulled up and the rain continued without caring at all. In the stands, Ron was doing something that the weather made unidentifiable but was clearly enthusiastic. Hermione had a shield charm up against the rain. She'd cast it on herself and Ron and Neville and 2 other first years nearby without making it a thing, and Harry could see her face through the blurring air and she was laughing. He did a lap of the pitch because he was wet anyway and the wind was extraordinary. Oliver Wood was crying. Harry was fairly sure it was the rain but equally sure it wasn't. May arrived with exams approaching and the particular quality of ambient anxiety that settled over Hogwarts whenever the calendar made its intentions clear. The library filled up. The common room filled up. The corridor outside Professor Flitwick's classroom filled up with people practicing silent incantations and occasionally making things happen by accident. Harry took his exams with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, complete and unperformed. The theory papers were straightforward. He wrote his answers at the speed of someone transcribing thoughts that were already organized, and spent the remaining time adding extensions that weren't required but were interesting. The practical exams were equally clean. McGonagall watched him transfigure a mouse into a snuff box in the first 30 seconds and spent the rest of his allocated time looking at the snuff box with an expression of contained professional emotion. The only exam that surprised him was History of Magic, not because it was difficult but because he found, midway through the questions on the International Confederation of Wizards, that he was enjoying the exercise. Professor Binns was widely considered to be the worst teaching experience at Hogwarts. He was, literally, a ghost who had died at his desk and continued teaching because he hadn't noticed, but the subject matter was genuinely interesting when approached as primary source analysis rather than memorized dates. Harry had written a response to the question on the Statute of Secrecy that was essentially a historiographical argument about Binns's methodology, which was either going to be the most interesting exam paper Binns had ever received or, more likely, would be graded by someone who found everything interesting and everything approximately equivalent. He handed it in and went to find Ron, who was sitting outside the exam hall with the loosened expression of someone who has just completed something and has decided to be happy about it regardless of outcome. "How was it?" Harry said. "The Goblin Rebellion's question was completely fair," Ron said, "which I consider a betrayal of everything Binns stands for." He paused. "Hermione came out 10 minutes ago. She's already writing notes about what she thinks she missed." "She didn't miss anything," Harry said. "I know. She knows. The note writing isn't about missing things, it's about, I don't know. Having something to do with the anxiety after the thing that caused the anxiety is over." Harry looked at him. "That's perceptive," he said. Ron shrugged. "I've got 5 siblings. You learn to read people." He stood up, stretching. "What do you actually want to do this summer?" Mum's going to ask and she'll plan something elaborate if she doesn't have a direction. Harry thought about this. He thought about it properly, which was something he'd been practicing, the act of wanting things for himself, not strategically or practically but simply because he wanted them. It was harder than it seemed. 10 years of privet drive had done something to the architecture of personal desire that required active maintenance to undo. The garden, he said. I'd like to sit in a garden and read things that have nothing to do with anything important. Ron stared at him. That's your big summer ambition. And your mother's cooking, Harry said. And chess. And probably flying if there's space. There's always space at the Burrow, Ron said. There's not really a garden so much as a field that's given up on being controlled, but there are chairs and they get put outside when the weather allows. He paused. You've never had a summer, have you? I've had summers, Harry said. They were just, the Dursleys, Ron said, with the particular tone he used for the Dursleys, which was the tone you used for something you found genuinely unconscionable but were trying to be measured about. Yes, Harry said. Right, Ron said. Garden and chess and flying and Mum's cooking. Consider it done. 2 nights before the end of term, Harry went to see Snape. He'd been thinking about this for a month, not whether to do it, but how. Snape was a man whose emotional interior was structured around the principle that feelings expressed were feelings exploited, a spy's habit applied to personal life. The private tutoring sessions had moved them somewhere different from where they'd started, but carefully, the way 2 people move on new ice, testing each weight before the next. He knocked on the dungeon office door at 8 in the evening and Snape called him in with the voice that meant he already knew who was knocking. The office was the most personal space Harry had seen Snape occupy, the rest of the dungeons were professional, tools and stations and the arranged neutrality of a classroom. The office had books in the unorganized arrangement of books that were actually read and returned to, a desk that was several things deep in parchment, and on the corner shelf, half concealed behind a stack of essays but there if you knew to look, a small framed portrait of a woman with Snape's cheekbones and Snape's eyes painted in the particular softened light of something that had been looked at often enough to wear slightly at the edges. Snape's mother, Harry thought. He sat in the chair across the desk without being asked and Snape looked at him with the expression that had replaced the early hostile assessment, something more complicated, less defended, the look of a man who had stopped deciding in advance what this student was going to be. Term ends Thursday, Harry said. It does, Snape said. I wanted to ask something before it does. He paused. Formally. Snape's eyebrows moved. Formally. Next year, Harry said. The private sessions. I'd like to continue them. If you're willing. Snape was very still. The detention framing would become difficult to maintain across a second year, he said carefully. We could simply call it what it is, Harry said. I'd argue there's a reasonable academic justification. Independent study, advanced potions track. McGonagall would sign off on it and Dumbledore would certainly sign off on it. You've thought about this? Yes. Snape picked up his quill and turned it in his hands, the gesture of a man thinking rather than writing. What do you want from these sessions, Potter? Not academically. Why do you come? Harry looked at him directly. Because you're the best potions theorist I've encountered outside of the written record, he said. And because you knew my mother, and these sessions are the closest I've come to knowing what she was like when she was here. He paused. And because I think you come because you need somewhere to talk about magic at the level it actually interests you, and I can keep up. Snape's jaw worked. The quill turned once more. Your mother, Snape said, would have had approximately 37 opinions about the Argentinian compression text and all of them would have been delivered at volume. Was she right a lot? Harry said. In the opinions. Approximately 70% of the time, Snape said. The other 30% she was spectacularly, creatively wrong in ways that were almost more interesting than being right. Harry felt it, the warmth, the permanence of her, still here in a dungeon office in May of 1992 in the specific quality of a man's grief. What was her best wrong opinion, he said. Snape looked at him. And then, slowly, carefully, like a man opening something he's kept shut, she was convinced, in 6th year, that you could brew a technically functional Veritaserum without the 3-month preparation period if you substituted the Stephanotis with a concentrated lunar distillate and accelerated the infusion temperature. Could you? Harry said. Absolutely not, Snape said. I told her this. She spent 2 weeks trying to prove me wrong and produced something that smelled extraordinary and did nothing at all, and she was so magnificently irritated by being wrong that she came back 3 days later and said, he stopped. What? Harry said. She said, fine, Sev, but the smell was better than yours, which means something interesting is happening with the distillate and I intend to find out what. Snape's voice was very quiet. She was right about that, incidentally. The distillate property she was chasing became the basis of a paper I published in 1987. I dedicated it to original research done by a colleague. I did not specify. The office was very quiet. She would have been furious, Harry said. Incandescent, Snape said, and there was something in his voice that was close enough to warmth to be its shadow. Harry let the silence hold. Then, next year, Professor. Same terms. I'll get the paperwork signed. Snape looked at him for a long moment. I will expect punctuality, Snape said. Arriving late to a session because you were in a conversation with Flitwick is not an acceptable explanation. The Flitwick conversation was about wand frequency modulation, Harry said. Which I would argue qualifies as, it does not qualify as anything that excuses your being late to my classroom, Snape said, and he was fighting something that was not quite a smile with every professional resource available to him. Understood, Harry said. He stood to leave. At the door, he turned, because there was one more thing and the year was ending and he decided to say it regardless of how it landed. Professor, he said. Snape looked up. Thank you, Harry said. For this year. For the sessions, and the texts, and the knife work, and all of it. He paused. And for keeping her memory. I know it's not easy. I know it costs you something. But it matters to me that someone who knew her is still keeping it. He paused. She's not lost, is what I mean. Because of you. Snape looked at him. He was a man of considerable self-control and considerable damage and 10 years of grief lived in a fortress of professionalism, and none of that was fully adequate for what he was looking at right now. Go to bed, Potter, he said, very quietly. Harry went. The end-of-year feast fell on a Wednesday, and the Great Hall was dressed for it in the way the Great Hall dressed for things, full candlelight, every table groaning, the ceiling showing the first real stars of June above the drifting warmth of the room. The house points column had Gryffindor in second place by a margin that Hermione had calculated was exactly bridgeable by a sufficiently dramatic end-of-year award. Harry had not arranged this. He had simply observed the numbers and thought, interesting. Dumbledore rose at the end of the feast and delivered the kind of speech he delivered well, warm and slightly cryptic and containing at least 3 statements that meant more than they appeared to, and then announced additional points. 50 to Hermione Granger for exceptional academic achievement throughout the year, the precise wording leaving room for the specific kind of achievement that had involved extended library hours and 47 careful questions. 50 to Ron Weasley for strategic ability demonstrated under pressure, with a formality to the phrasing that made Ron go slightly pink because Dumbledore's eyes had briefly found the third-floor corridor's direction when he said it. 60 to Harry Potter for presence of mind, for protection of a fellow student, and for confronting danger with the particular quality of courage that considers the full weight of a situation before acting. The hall erupted. The points column shifted. Gryffindor took the house cup. Ron made a sound that was not suitable for a formal dinner and Hermione's composure lasted approximately 3 seconds before she abandoned it entirely and the Gryffindor table became a noise that bounced off the stone walls and went up into the starry ceiling and dissipated into something that felt, if you were paying attention, like genuine communal joy. Harry sat in it and felt it with his whole self. Fred and George materialized on either side of him from somewhere down the table with the synchronized efficiency of people who had planned a maneuver. "We'd like to note," Fred said. "For the record," George said. "That we called this in September," Fred said. "We said, this boy will win us the cup," George said. "Not by himself," Harry said. "Generous," Fred said. "But accurate," George agreed. "The chess game was mostly Ron." "The chess game was entirely Ron," Harry said. "We're going to tell everyone it was equally distributed," Fred said. "Ron will hate that," George said. "Ron will love that," Harry said, because Ron, who could hear this whole exchange and was pretending he couldn't, had gone the specific shade of pleased red that Harry had learned to recognize. He looked down the table at the Slytherin section. Draco Malfoy was sitting with his housemates in the particular way of someone who is present physically and elsewhere mentally, watching the Gryffindor celebration with an expression Harry had learned to read, not the performed contempt that was his default public setting, but underneath it something more honest, something that was trying to decide what it felt. Harry caught his eye. Draco held it for a moment. Then he gave a very small, very private nod, the precise minimum gesture that communicated something without committing to having communicated it. Harry returned it. Dumbledore caught him in the corridor after the feast. Not intercepted, the old man had simply positioned himself near the great hall doors with the uncanny timing that Harry suspected was partly genuine intuition and partly very long experience predicting where people went after formal events. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Professor," Harry said. They walked together without a specific destination, which was the old man's preferred mode for serious conversations. Motion made them less confrontational, gave both parties somewhere to look that wasn't the other person. "Nicholas Flamel wrote to me," Dumbledore said. "He wrote to me as well," Harry said. "He told me that your letter was the most honest communication he'd received about his situation in 60 years. A pause. "He also told me that you made the argument about the stone's destruction in French, which he considered the appropriate courtesy given the circumstances." "It seemed rude to do otherwise," Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The corridor was mostly empty, the last stragglers from the feast drifting towards staircases. "He and Perenelle have made their peace with it," Dumbledore said. "He told me to tell you, and I confess I nearly didn't pass this on because it says more than I'm entirely comfortable with, that you were right about everything, and that he suspects you knew you were right before you wrote the letter." "I hoped I was right," Harry said. "I thought I was right. I wasn't certain." "The distinction matters to you." "Certainty matters to me," Harry said. "I'm very careful about the difference between what I think and what I know." Dumbledore glanced sideways at him with an expression that was one of the more genuine ones he wore. "Alastor Moody," he said, which seemed like a non sequitur. "You know of him?" "Retired Auror. Best dark wizard catcher of his generation. Somewhat particular in his methods. He's going to be involved in the work ahead," Dumbledore said, carefully. "The work that your information makes necessary." "The Horcruxes," Harry said. "Yes. I'll help where I can," Harry said. "The memories I carry are specific about some of the objects. I'll make those available as we go. But I'd like to be involved in the strategic planning rather than briefed after decisions are made." He said this without apology. Not aggressive, not demanding. Just clear. Dumbledore was quiet for 3 steps. "You are 11 years old," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "And I have information you need, and I'm going to be at the center of this regardless of planning because that's the structure of the situation. I'd prefer to be a participant rather than a piece." Another pause. "Your mother," Dumbledore said, and there was the warmth that entered his voice whenever he said it, had exactly this quality. The absolute refusal to be a piece on someone else's board. He paused. It was magnificent and frequently exhausting. "I'll try to manage the exhausting part," Harry said. "I doubt it," Dumbledore said, and for the first time Harry heard in his voice the thing that was purely the old man rather than the headmaster or the strategist or the grief-keeper. just an old man walking a corridor with a boy he genuinely liked. But I'll take the magnificent. They stopped at the foot of the staircase. Next year, Harry said. I'd like regular meetings. Not debriefs. Conversations. About the Horcruxes, about the magical theory of soul fragmentation, about what you know of his history that I don't have in the fragments. Dumbledore looked at him. I can give you corresponding information, Harry said. The memories I carry include pieces of his knowledge of dark arts at a level that will be relevant to what's coming. Not to use, to understand. To know what you're facing. And in return, Dumbledore said, you want my transparency. I want your honesty, Harry said. The management, I understand why you do it. I understand the instinct to protect by controlling information. I'm asking you to set it aside, with me, and work together instead. The old man looked at him for a long moment. I managed you, he said. Yes. And you are asking me not to. I'm asking you to stop. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that was not absence of thought but active thought happening below the surface. Yes, he said finally. All right. Harry looked at him steadily. Thank you. Thank you, Dumbledore said. For being what you are, rather than what any of this might have made you. He paused. I confess I worried. In those first years, when I had left you at Privet Drive and hoped the protection was enough and wondered what was growing inside you along with all the rest. I worried about what you might become. I know, Harry said. You don't hold it against me. You were trying to protect the world with the tools you had, Harry said. It was the wrong tool for this job. Now you have better information. Use it. The old man smiled. It was one of the real ones, not the performed version, smaller, less theatrical, carrying something genuine underneath. Good night, Harry, he said. Good night, Professor, Harry said. He went up the stairs and didn't look back, because there was nothing to look back at that he wasn't already carrying forward. The night before the Hogwarts Express, Harry sat in the window seat of the Gryffindor common room for the last time that year and thought about nothing in particular with the specific luxury of someone who has earned the blank space. The common room was warm and the fire was down to coals and the sound from the dormitory above was the comfortable sound of people in the final stages of packing, the particular percussion of trunks being argued with, the occasional thud. Hermione came down the stairs at 11 with her trunk handled and her expression the organized one she wore when she was satisfied with her own preparation. She looked around the empty common room and found Harry in the window and came to sit across from him the way she always did. Ready, she said. Almost, he said. She tucked her feet under her. What aren't you ready for? He thought about it. Nothing, specifically. More, the in-between of it. Going from here to somewhere else. The gap. The burrow, she said. Starting August. Yes. And I'll write, she said. Regularly. I have approximately 11 books to get through and I'll want to discuss them and I cannot discuss them with my parents because they're very supportive but they've reached the edges of their ability to engage with advanced magical theory. I'll write back, Harry said. I know you will. She paused. Harry. Yes. This year was, she stopped. Tried again. I didn't know what Hogwarts was going to be. I hoped it would be, intellectually serious. I hoped I'd find it challenging. I hoped I'd do well. She looked at him. I didn't know I was going to find someone who, she stopped again, in the particular way she stopped when the thing she wanted to say was truer than she was quite prepared for. I know, Harry said. Me too. She looked at him steadily. That was very economical. I meant the whole of it, he said. A small pause. I know you did, she said, and the expression on her face, the warm private one, the one that was specifically his, settled into something comfortable and certain. Outside the window, the Hogwarts grounds were dark and still, the lake a long silver absence in the darkness, the edges of the forest absolutely black. The castle held them in its warm and ancient quiet, the way it had held students for 1,000 years, the way it would hold them again when they came back in September. Ron came down the stairs at 11:15 with his trunk somehow already in the corridor and his expression the particular one of someone who has finished packing with unusual efficiency and is mildly surprised by this. He found them both in the window and came to sit on the floor with his back against the wall below them, the natural position for someone who is comfortable enough in a place to take up the floor. "Last night," he said. "Last night," Harry agreed. "Chess," Ron said. "It's nearly midnight," Hermione said. "One game," Ron said. "Quick one." He produced a traveling set from somewhere and set it up on the hearthrug without waiting for agreement because he knew the agreement was coming, and Hermione slid off the window seat to the floor with the expression of someone who is pretending to be inconvenienced and is not, and Harry came down to sit across from Ron in the cool warm light. They played until midnight, and then past it, and the game went long because Ron played seriously and Harry wouldn't give him anything easily and Hermione kept making observations from the side that were technically not advice but were functionally advice and made Ron laugh every time. The fire burned to almost nothing. The castle settled around them. Harry looked at the board and at Ron across from it and at Hermione beside him with her chin on her knees, and felt the thing he'd been learning to feel all year, the warmth of the permanent kind, not performed, not strategic, just real. The thing Flamel had written about. The thing his mother had given him at the center of all of it. He moved his knight. "Oh, that's cruel," Ron said, with vast admiration. "Sorry," Harry said, and wasn't. The game went to checkmate at midnight and the fire went to ash and the three of them went to bed in the sleeping castle, and in the morning the train would come, and the summer would open up like something new. Chapter 6. The world rearranges itself. The Hogwarts Express left at 11. Harry was on the platform at 10:15, which gave him 45 minutes of the particular quality of King's Cross that existed only on platform 9 3/4, the organized chaos of 100 families saying goodbye to a school year, trunks being loaded with varying degrees of structural confidence, owls making their feelings known about cage proximity to other owls. Younger siblings looking at the scarlet engine with the specific hunger of people who aren't yet allowed the thing they want. He stood with his trunk and watched it with uncomplicated pleasure. Ron arrived at 10:22 with his entire family, which arrived the way the Weasley family always arrived, as a weather event. Molly Weasley was simultaneously directing trunk logistics, checking that Percy had his prefect badge, preventing the twins from doing something to the luggage trolley that would have had consequences, and locating Ginny, who was 11 months from her own first ride on this train and was looking at the engine with an expression that Harry recognized. The youngest Weasley. Red-haired, sharp-eyed, and currently standing slightly apart from the family chaos with her arms crossed and her jaw set in the expression of someone storing everything for later use. Harry walked over. "First time seeing it properly," he said. She looked at him. She was a year younger than him and had been told, he suspected, a very specific set of things about Harry Potter, because the look she gave him when she recognized who he was went through approximately 7 phases in under 2 seconds. "Yes," she said, recovering quickly. She looked back at the engine. "Ron says it's bigger than it looks from the barrier." "It is," Harry said. "The inside doesn't follow the outside's rules." She glanced at him sideways. "Ron also says you won us the Quidditch Cup and sorted the troll situation and generally made first year considerably more interesting than expected." "Ron did the chess," Harry said. "And Hermione sorted the troll situation, mostly." "He says you're modest about it," Ginny said. "He says it in an annoying way, like he's proud of you for it." Harry smiled. "Are you going to be annoyed by me as well?" She looked at him with an expression that was doing something complicated behind the composure, 11 years old and clearly used to being underestimated by virtue of being the youngest and the only girl and 2 steps behind everyone else on the timeline. "Probably not," she said. "I'll reserve judgment." "Fair," Harry said. Molly Weasley arrived in their vicinity with the trajectory of someone who had spotted a situation and decided to address it. "Oh, Harry dear, you've met Ginny." She stopped when she registered that they were having a conversation that did not require adult facilitation. The surprise on her face resolved into something warmer. "She's been wanting to meet you all year," she said. "Mum," Ginny said, with the specific tone of someone for whom the ground cannot open fast enough. "I've been wanting to meet her," Harry said, and meant it simply, which made Ginny look at him with the reassessment expression and Molly look at him with the expression she wore when she was deciding he was good. "You'll come to us this summer," Molly said, which was not a question. "Arthur's been wanting to meet you properly. He's very," she selected her word carefully, "enthusiastic about Muggle things, and I've had to ask him twice not to begin the visit by showing Harry the collection." "I'd actually enjoy seeing the collection," Harry said. Molly's eyes went to heaven in the way of a woman who has been outvoted by circumstances. "Then you're as bad as he is," she said, and patted his arm with the warmth of someone who has decided that being as bad as Arthur is, in her estimation, a point in your favor. The twins materialized at his shoulders, which they did with the particular synchrony of people who had been standing nearby waiting for the right moment. "The collection," Fred said. "Don't tell him about the collection," George said. "Someone had to warn him," Fred said. "He's going to love it," Harry said. "He's going to love it," George said to Fred. "We know," Fred said, and they both looked at Harry with the coordinated affection of two people who had decided sometime in September that Harry Potter was theirs in some indefinable way that they had no intention of clarifying. The compartment filled up in the way their compartments always filled up, Harry and Ron first, then Hermione with her book already open, then Neville with Trevor the Toad in his front pocket looking resigned, then Ginny, who arrived at the compartment door and looked at the available space and the available company with the assessment of someone deciding whether to press or retreat. "There's room," Harry said. She came in and sat beside Hermione, and they introduced themselves with the brisk directness of two people who are immediately interested in each other and have decided to be efficient about it. "You're Muggle-born," Ginny said. "Yes," Hermione said, with the set jaw that anticipated challenge. "My mum says Muggle-born witches are often the strongest," Ginny said, completely matter-of-factly, the statement of someone reporting observed fact rather than offering comfort. "She says it's because the magic has nowhere to go but in." Hermione blinked. The jaw set relaxed. "I've read something similar," she said, "in the context of magical core density theory, though the causal mechanism is debated." "Yes," Ginny said, "exactly, the mechanism question is interesting because," Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. They both looked at the window. Outside, the platform was sliding past as the train began to move, the families on the platform receding, Molly waving with the absolute commitment of someone who intended to be the last thing visible, Arthur with his hand up and his expression the expression of a man who had been told to contain his enthusiasm and was managing it by approximately 30%. "Your family," Harry said. "I know," Ron said. "They're a lot." "I like a lot," Harry said. Ron looked at him sideways with the particular warm seriousness he deployed when something mattered. "Yeah," he said. "I know you do. That's why it works." The train cleared the station and hit its open speed, and London began to open up around them, the backs of buildings, the specific grey-silver of a city seen from the train, the sky above it wide and June pale and full of the particular quality of light that late morning has in England when it's bothered to be genuinely good. Neville let Trevor out of his pocket. Trevor sat on the seat with the professional stillness of a toad that has made peace with its situation. "He always looks like that," Neville said. "Like what?" Harry said. "Like he's accepted something," Neville said. Harry looked at Trevor. Trevor looked at nothing in particular with complete equanimity. "Good instincts," Harry said. Neville smiled, the sudden, slightly surprised smile of someone who hadn't expected to be taken seriously and had been. 3 hours north of London, Hermione closed her book and looked at Harry with the expression that meant she'd been thinking about something throughout the reading rather than only reading. "The summer," she said. "Yes. I've been thinking about the Horcruxes." Ron, who had been sleeping against the window with his mouth slightly open, opened one eye. 5 minutes, he said. I only need 5 minutes of not thinking about Horcruxes. You've been asleep for 2 hours, Hermione said. Preemptively, Ron said, closing the eye again. The 5 that remain, Hermione said to Harry, lowering her voice. You have information about them from the memories. Partial information, Harry said. The fragments each carried different pieces. Some of them overlap, some don't. What I have is geographical rather than specific. I know the general shape of where he hid things rather than the precise locations. What does geographical mean in this context? One is in a place he considered his ancestral home, not Hogwarts, though he treated it similarly. One is in something he valued because it had belonged to a founder. He paused. One is in a place you'd have to go into water to reach. Hermione was writing. She'd produced her notebook from somewhere with the efficiency of someone who kept it accessible specifically for this kind of conversation. Don't write the specifics, Harry said quietly. Not yet. Not on a train. She looked up. Considered. Capped her quill. But you could find them. Eventually. With time and the right support. He paused. Dumbledore knows the broad shape of the problem. He's going to be working on it from his end. What I want is for us to be building our own understanding independently, not to race him to the answer, but so that when the time comes we're contributors, not passengers. Ron's eyes were both open now. When you say when the time comes, he said. It won't be this year, Harry said. Or next year. The Horcrux problem is not 11, 12, 13 years old territory. We need to grow into it. He paused. But we can use the years growing into it intelligently. Ron was quiet for a moment. What does intelligently look like? Learning things that will be relevant, Harry said. Not just curriculum. Broader. Defense theory, specifically, not the classroom version, the applied version. Curse breaking as a discipline. The properties of soul magic and how you unmake what's been made with it. I want to research basilisk venom, Hermione said immediately. Harry and Ron both looked at her. As a theoretical Horcrux-destroying agent, she said, slightly defensive. The magical destructive capacity is well documented and the soul-affecting properties haven't been adequately studied. She's already thought about this more than we have, Ron said to Harry. She thinks about everything more than everyone, Harry said. That's why she's the research half of this. What am I? Ron said. Strategic, Harry said. And the person most likely to see the move nobody else is looking at. Ron absorbed this. And you, he said. I'm the archive, Harry said. The information. And he paused, choosing the word carefully. The one who actually does the dangerous part, Ron said. I was going to say the tactical application, Harry said. Same thing, Ron said. But yes. That's the team, then. Hermione looked between them. The team, she said, with the specific tone she used when she was moved by something and was managing it by treating it practically. The team, Harry confirmed. Outside, England moved past in its summer configuration, green fields and the long horizontal lines of the Midlands, the sky enormous above it. Trevor had moved to the window and was looking out with the expression of a toad contemplating the infinite. Can I ask something? Neville said. Yes, Harry said. Neville had been listening throughout with the particular quiet of someone who processes at a different pace and waits until he has something real to contribute. The Horcruxes, he said. I don't know as much about them as you do. But, is Voldemort actually gone? Like actually? Harry looked at him. Neville had said the name without the flinch that most people had, which Harry noted. The piece that was here is destroyed, Harry said. What's left of him, and there's something left, is thin. Diminished. Probably close to nothing as a functioning entity. He paused. But the Horcruxes are anchors. As long as they exist, so does the possibility of him. And you're going to destroy them, Neville said. We're going to destroy them, Harry said, including the compartment rather than speaking for himself alone. Neville nodded slowly. I'd like to help, he said. When it's time. I know I'm not, he stopped, the familiar Neville pause where he anticipated his own inadequacy and then visibly decided against it. I know I'm not the most powerful. But I can learn, and I'm not going to run. Harry looked at him for a moment. Good, he said, and meant it entirely. Neville sat up a little straighter. Ginny, who had been listening with the focused quiet of someone absorbing everything for later analysis, glanced between Harry and Neville with an expression that suggested she was updating her understanding of the shape of this group and finding it interesting. The train pulled into King's Cross at 6 in the evening and the platform filled with the noise of reunion, parents finding students, trunks being dragged, the specific pitch of noise that large groups of people make when a long separation is ending. Harry came through the barrier last, behind the rest of them, and stood on the Muggle side of King's Cross with his trunk and his owl and the summer ahead of him. The Dursleys were there, because he had written to confirm his arrival as a courtesy, and Vernon Dursley's expression when he saw Harry coming through the barrier was the expression of a man who had been hoping the year would change something fundamental and was confronted with evidence that it had not changed in any direction that served him. Harry walked to them with the uncomplicated ease he brought to everything and said, "Good evening. And then, I'll need my own room." Vernon blinked. "I beg your pardon." "My own room," Harry said. "Dudley's second room is unoccupied. I'll use that." He said this with the same quality he used for everything, not aggressive, not apologetic, just stating a fact about how things were going to be. "I'll be at the Burrow from August until term starts. That gives you July. A room with a door that locks from the inside is all I need." Petunia was looking at him with the expression she'd been developing since September, not the old contempt, but something more complex, a woman trying to reconcile the boy she'd been housing with the person she was looking at. Vernon started. "Uncle Vernon," Harry said. "I can do things that would be very disruptive if I chose to. I have no interest in choosing to. I'm asking for very little. Let's have a reasonable summer." This was the most direct he'd been with them and he watched the effect. Vernon's face went through the color sequence but stopped short of the arterial purple, which was progress. Some part of the man's deep instinctual calculation was apparently running the cost-benefit analysis and arriving at an answer. "Fine," Vernon said, in the voice of a man surrendering a hill he'd decided wasn't worth the defense. "Thank you," Harry said. He meant it straightforwardly, without irony. On the platform behind him, Molly Weasley was hugging Ron with the thoroughness of someone who had been separated from her child for 9 months and intended to account for every day of it. Arthur was shaking Percy's hand and listening to Percy's enthusiastic account of his academic year with the patient delight of a father who loves each of his children specifically. The twins were in the middle of something with Ginny that involved a small package and Ginny's defensive posture and considerable laughter. Hermione was saying goodbye to her own parents, a couple who looked at their daughter with the particular pride of people who understand they've produced something that has exceeded the frame they put around it, and love her for it completely. She turned and found Harry across the platform. He was watching her family and she was watching his borrowed version of one, and across the noise and steam and end-of-year chaos they looked at each other with the economy of two people who don't need many words for the important things. She mouthed, "Right soon." He mouthed back, "First letter tomorrow." She smiled, the real one, the private one, and turned back to her parents, and Harry turned back to the Dursleys, and summer opened up between them like a promise. He was in the car 15 minutes before he felt it. Not a specific sensation, more the awareness of a particular kind of attention. He was sitting in the back of Vernon's Vauxhall and the traffic was doing what London traffic always did and Vernon was muttering about roundabouts, and Harry felt the quality of the evening shift in a way that had nothing to do with weather. He looked out the window. Nothing obvious. Street, cars, pedestrians making their June evening decisions. But he turned it over. The sensation was familiar in the way something is familiar when you felt its cousin before, the same family as what he'd felt from Quirrell, the same fragmented quality, soul magic operating at low intensity in the surrounding environment. Not inside someone. Ambient. Like smoke after a fire, the residue of a presence recently nearby. He filed it. Not with alarm, not with urgency. With the calm interest of someone who has been shown a thread and intends to follow it when the circumstances allow. Whatever Voldemort was becoming in his diminished state, he was not dormant. He was reconstituting. Slowly, probably painfully, somewhere in the margins of the world where a fragment of consciousness with enough will and enough hate could find purchase. Harry thought about this for the rest of the car journey with the same quality of attention he'd brought to chess problems and potions theory and Hermione's paper about his own nature. Strategic. Patient. Not afraid. The Dursleys' house appeared at the end of Privet Drive with its aggressive normality, the identical gardens and the identical windows and the very specific English suburban insistence that everything was fine and had always been fine and would continue to be fine regardless of evidence. Harry took his trunk out of the boot and carried it up the front path and went in. The house was smaller than it had been. He was aware of this in the specific way you're aware of growth, not compared to a measurement, but compared to how a thing felt before. The ceiling that had seemed low when he was 10 was simply a ceiling. The cupboard under the stairs was a door in a wall. He went up to Dudley's second room, which still smelled of old sports equipment and the particular staleness of a room that hadn't been opened in months, and opened the window and let the June air in and set his trunk at the foot of the bed. The bed was significantly larger than the one in his dormitory and had no Weasley snoring audibly through a curtain and was therefore objectively inferior in every way that mattered. He unpacked his notebooks first, the 3 composition books and the new ones he'd started this year, which were considerably less cramped than the first. His books, organized in the order he'd be returning to them. The photograph of his parents on the windowsill where it could catch the light. Flamel's letter in the front of his primary notebook. The letter from Snape, which was not a letter, was a single sheet of parchment on which was written, in Snape's precise angular hand, a summer reading list with 18 texts on it and margin notes that were more extensive than the list itself, and at the bottom, with no preamble, do not miss the 5th text's argument about temperature variance. It is wrong in a specific way that will tell you something about what Borage failed to understand. If you cannot source it through conventional channels, write to me directly. Below that, a Gringotts address. Not a home address, a correspondence address, the kind you maintained when your home address was not something you distributed. Harry looked at this for a moment and felt the warmth that he associated with things that had been earned properly, the particular satisfaction of a relationship that had arrived somewhere good by being honest about where it started. He would write on Wednesday, once he'd had time to start the 5th text. He sat on the bed and opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote at the top, Summer, Year 1. Below that he wrote a list of things he wanted to do, the things he'd told Ron about and the things he hadn't told anyone yet because they were more private than strategy. Sit in a garden. Learn to cook something because the Weasleys would not let him be entirely useless in their kitchen and he intended to be usefully useless. Read the things on Snape's list. Write to Hermione, properly, letters rather than notes, the kind of correspondence that develops ideas across distance. Fly whenever there was space. He wrote at the bottom of the list, understand what I am well enough to say it simply. He looked at this for a moment. Then below it, not what I can do. Not what I know. What I am. He'd been working on this question since he was old enough to form it. The composition notebooks from 7-year-old Harry onward were essentially one long attempt to find the answer, through the methodology of a child who had no methodology yet but understood instinctively that the question mattered. He'd made progress. He could describe the situation accurately and the mechanisms functionally and the resulting abilities with precision. What he couldn't quite yet do was say who Harry Potter was in the sentence that didn't start with Voldemort. He was working on that. He thought, he's the boy who sits by the lake in the morning because the squid is good company. He's the person who reads someone's handwriting on a list of books and feels warmth because the handwriting is trying to say something the person isn't ready to say directly. He's the one who flies in bad weather on purpose because the wind is extraordinary. He's someone who wants a summer garden and his friend's mother's cooking and a chess game that goes past midnight. He's the one who held on, in a stone chamber, when holding on mattered, and felt his mother's love working through him like the cleanest magic in the world, and understood in that moment that love was not a soft thing, not a decorative sentiment, but a structural force with load-bearing capacity in excess of anything else he'd encountered, and that he had been built from it and would always be built from it regardless of what else he became. He wrote in his notebook, "Harry Potter is someone who was loved before he knew what love was, and has spent 11 years figuring out what that means, and is not done yet." He looked at it. Then he closed the notebook and lay back on the too large, inferior bed and looked at the ceiling and felt the evening come down around the house, the June light going gold and then amber and then the particular blue of a summer evening that is running out of day, and not unhappy about it. Tomorrow he would write to Hermione. Tuesday he would go to the library and start on Snape's list. Wednesday he would write to Snape about the 5th text. He would write to Dumbledore about the ambient sensation in the car and frame it not as alarm but as information, which was what it was. He would do all of these things with the same quality he tried to bring to everything: complete attention, honest engagement, the willingness to be wrong and the willingness to be right, and the patience to know the difference. And in September the Hogwarts Express would run again from platform 9 3/4, and the castle would have fires in the corridors against the Scottish autumn, and Snape's dungeon would smell of pepper and sea salt and something he still hadn't identified, and Ron would have a chess problem waiting, and Hermione would have a book she'd been saving for the right conversation. And somewhere in the margins of the world, thin and diminished and furious, something that used to be extraordinary was trying to become itself again. Harry Potter was not afraid of it. He was, if he was honest, slightly curious. He went to sleep as the last of the light left, and the house on Privet Drive did what the house on Privet Drive always did, settled into its small, careful, aggressively ordinary life, and outside, the summer continued, enormous and indifferent and full of everything that was coming, and Harry slept without dreaming, which he could do now without effort, and in the morning he wrote the first letter. He addressed it to Hermione, and the first line said, "I've been thinking about the 3rd text on Snape's list, and I think it overlaps with something you wrote in section 4 of your paper, so here it is," and it went on for 6 pages, and it was the beginning of something that would continue all summer and into the year and into the years after that, building the way things build when they're made from genuine interest and genuine care, not by design but by repeated honest engagement, one letter at a time. The owl took it at 8 in the morning and wheeled up into the June sky and was gone, and Harry stood at the window and watched it go and felt the world continuing to rearrange itself around him, slowly, thoroughly, in the direction of something that didn't have a complete name yet. He turned back to his notebook and picked up his pen and started on the next page. There was a great deal of year 2 to think about. Chapter 12, The logic is flawed but the error is informative. The kind of note someone made for a student they were actually thinking about. He put the list carefully in his notebook and wrote Snape's name at the top of it. He was going to have to do something about Snape before the year was out. Not strategically, just because the man was clearly in a kind of pain that Harry understood the shape of and couldn't in good conscience ignore. The last present was the strangest. A flat rectangular package, no owl, apparently placed under the tree by hand or by magic sometime in the night. When Harry opened it he found a frame, and in the frame a photograph he'd never seen, his parents, perhaps 19, sitting in a pub somewhere, surrounded by people Harry could half identify from fragments of borrowed memory. The Marauders era, the height of the First War, before everything fell apart. His father had his arm around his mother and they were both laughing at something outside the frame. On the back of the frame, in a hand he'd never seen before, they would have been proud. They are. Harry held this for a moment and then set it on the windowsill where the winter light hit it, and looked at it, and felt the thing he'd felt in the mirror, not grief, not quite want, something older and simpler. Ron came in from the dormitory with his own green sweater on over his pajamas, looked at Harry, looked at the photograph, and said nothing, which was precisely the right response. They went down to a breakfast that felt enormous for the size of the crowd and ate until the fire was bright and the windows were grey with snow and the world outside was exactly the right distance away. He found Snape on the 27th of December, in the potions classroom. Harry had gone down to the dungeons because the stores had what he needed for an experiment he'd been running, a variation on the draft of peace that used a substituted moonstone to alter the sedation profile, and the stores were unlocked over the holidays on the assumption that responsible students wouldn't abuse the access. Harry had been down twice before. Snape was at the preparation table, working on something that smelled of black pepper and sea salt and something floral that Harry couldn't place, moving through the preparation with the focused economy of a man doing something he found genuinely satisfying. He didn't look up when Harry entered. "The scales are on the left wall," Snape said. "Don't touch anything on this table." "I won't," Harry said. He got what he needed and measured it with the precision he'd been developing since October. He was aware of Snape's attention shifting from his own work to the preparation Harry was performing, the way attention shifts when something catches it involuntarily. "That's not a standard recipe," Snape said. "No. It's a modification of the draft of peace. I'm testing whether the moonstone substitution affects the duration or just the profile." A pause. "Where did you develop that hypothesis?" "Your 7th-year textbook. There's a footnote in the distillation chapter about moonstone solubility at different temperatures that implies a potential substitution pathway. It took a while to work out the proportions." Snape was quiet. Harry could hear him not saying the obvious thing, which was that no first-year should have access to 7th-year texts or be in a position to derive experimental modifications from footnotes. "The list you sent," Harry said. "I sent no list," Snape said. "The list you anonymously included with my Christmas presents," Harry said pleasantly. "Thank you. The Argentinian text on compression brewing is extraordinary." Another pause. "The Argentinian text is out of print," Snape said. "I know. I'm going to have to track down a copy." Snape set down his knife. Harry could feel the quality of his attention shift again, the same thing that had happened in the library, the professional interest failing to stay professional. He came around the table and stood at a distance that was closer than a professor normally stood and looked at what Harry was doing. He pointed at Harry's lacewing preparation. "You're still lifting the edge on the final stroke." "I know. I've been trying to correct the motion but my hand defaults back." "Your grip is wrong." Snape moved to beside him, close enough to see clearly, and looked at Harry's hand on the knife with the expression of a craftsman identifying a structural problem. "You're holding it like a pen. The control comes from the last 2 fingers, not the first 2. Harry adjusted his grip. "Better. Now cut." He cut. The slice was clean. Snape made a sound that was quiet and affirmative and probably cost him something. Again. Harry cut again. Same result. They stood at the preparation table in the dungeon kitchen in the cold December quiet and Snape corrected his technique with the patient efficiency of someone who was not thinking about whether this was the appropriate dynamic for a professor and a first year. He was thinking about the work. Harry let him think about the work, because the work was what Snape knew how to love without it being complicated. After 20 minutes Snape stepped back and assessed the preparation. "Acceptable," he said. "The annotation on the compression chapter," Harry said. "You wrote the error is informative." "What error did you mean?" Snape looked at him. "You spotted the error." "I think so. The argument relies on a constant that isn't actually constant, it shifts with the caster's core temperature." "Which implies," Snape said, and stopped. "Which implies that some of the documented variation in potion outcomes between practitioners isn't technique-based," Harry said. "It's physiological." The silence was the particular silence of 2 people finishing each other's reasoning. Snape looked at him with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously, the professional recognition, the intellectual engagement, and underneath both of those the thing Harry had noticed from the beginning, the raw and complicated grief that surfaced when Snape looked at him and found something of Lily. "Your mother," Snape said, and stopped himself. "Please," Harry said quietly. "You don't have to." "She used to," Snape said, and the sentence remained unfinished, but Harry could hear the whole of it in the 3 words. "I know," Harry said. I can feel her magic in the way I approach things. I didn't know her but I can feel the shape of how she thought. The quickness of it. He paused. It must be strange. Seeing it. Snape's jaw worked. He looked away. His hands, which had been relaxed during the lesson, had closed. Strange, he said, flatly, which was the most inadequate word for whatever was happening behind his eyes, and Harry thought, he's been alone with this for 10 years. 10 years of grief pressed down under professional contempt and self-discipline and the particular brutal efficiency of a spy who couldn't afford to feel things in public. Harry said, I'd like to know more about her. Not the books, they're useless. Not second-hand accounts. What you knew. He looked at Snape directly. When you're ready. Not as an assignment. Just, if you wanted to. Snape looked at him for a very long moment. He said nothing. He went back to his preparation table. He picked up his knife. But he didn't say no, and Harry was fairly certain that mattered. Draco Malfoy ambushed him in the library on January 5th, the day before term resumed. Ambushed was the wrong word, Draco didn't ambush. He arrived, seated himself across the table from Harry with the elaborate casualness of someone who had been thinking about this for quite some time and was pretending he hadn't, and looked at Harry's open books with an expression that was assessing the situation. You stayed for Christmas, Draco said. So did you, Harry said. Draco's mouth tightened. My father wanted me home. I told him I had studying to do. Harry looked up from his book. He read the situation in Draco's jaw and the controlled quality of his posture and the very small defiance of I told him I had studying to do. How is your father? Fine, Draco said, with the clipped precision of someone closing a door. Then, because apparently he'd decided something, he was angry that you were sorted into Gryffindor. Was he? He thinks it's a waste. He thinks, Draco stopped. The familiar pattern, his father's opinion as a credential, as a frame, as the language in which he understood the world, and the increasingly frequent pauses where he caught himself using it and wasn't sure he wanted to. He thinks someone like you should be, in Slytherin. Harry said. Yes. Someone like me, Harry said, carefully. What does he mean by that? Draco looked at him. You're powerful, he said, and this was his own voice, stripped of the Lucius cadence. Everyone knows it. Snape knows it. McGonagall practically fell over herself, he stopped. You handle things that fifth years couldn't handle. You're not afraid of anyone. He paused on this. Not even Dumbledore. Dumbledore is admirable, Harry said. That's not the same as frightening. My father is afraid of Dumbledore, Draco said, and this was more honest than he'd clearly intended because something crossed his face, surprise at himself, the brief look of someone who has just said the true thing instead of the careful thing. He doesn't admit it. But I can tell. Harry put his quill down. And you, he said. Draco met his eyes. What? Are you afraid of Dumbledore? A pause. Not particularly, Draco said, with the careful honesty of someone working out what they actually thought rather than what they were supposed to think. He's old and very powerful and everyone acts like that means something automatically, but he's still, he searched for the word. Still just a person. Making choices. Yes, Harry said. Exactly. Draco was quiet for a moment. The library around them was empty and cold, the shelves casting long afternoon shadows, and Draco Malfoy sat across from Harry Potter and was not performing anything in particular for the first time Harry could recall. In the robe shop, Draco said. You told me I was better than the thing I was doing. With Neville. Yes. You meant it. Yes. Why? Not defensive. Genuinely asking. Harry considered his answer. Because you're smart, he said. Genuinely smart, not the performed kind. And because when you're not running your father's script you're considerably more interesting than when you are. He paused. And because I've seen what it costs to build your whole identity on borrowed fear, and it's not a good return on investment. Draco stared at him. Borrowed fear, he said. Your father is afraid. He built his life around a man, around Voldemort, because Voldemort represented power that your father could orbit and feel large inside. Voldemort is gone, and has been gone for 10 years, and your father is still organizing himself around the shape of that fear. Which means your father handed you a map to a place that doesn't exist. The silence was long. You know about my father, Draco said. I know about the general shape of how people like your father operate. I know the structure. I've seen it from the inside of some very detailed memories. Draco's eyes moved to Harry's scar, and this time there was something different in the look, not the social credential checking of their first meeting, something more complex, a boy trying to work out what he was looking at. You're nothing like what anyone told me you'd be, Draco said. What did they tell you? That you'd be arrogant. Riding on the scar. That you'd be weak, actually, when it came down to it. That you survived by luck and that a real confrontation would prove it. He said this with the particular discomfort of someone quoting something they've already decided they don't believe. And now? Now I think my father has never actually met you and has no idea what he's talking about, Draco said, which for Draco Malfoy in January of first year was approximately the most significant thing he could have said. Harry smiled at him. Sit down properly. You've been on the edge of that chair since you arrived. Draco sat back. Some tension left his shoulders. Why are you still in Slytherin, he said. The hat could have put you anywhere. I am in Slytherin, Harry said. I'm also in Gryffindor. Where the hat actually put me is less important than that. Draco frowned. That doesn't make sense. You have ambition and cunning and enough self-interest to be genuinely effective, Harry said. Those are Slytherin qualities and they're excellent qualities. You're also capable of examining your own assumptions and changing your mind when evidence contradicts them, which is something Slytherin doesn't always teach. He paused. Don't let one hat's decision become the whole description. Draco was quiet for a moment. Then, my father would say that kind of thinking is how Gryffindors justify mediocrity. Your father would, Harry agreed. What do you think? Another long pause. I think, Draco said slowly, that I'd like to stop saying what my father thinks and figure out what I think. He sounded like someone reading a sentence they'd written and hearing it for the first time. Which is possibly the most disloyal thing I've ever said. Or the most honest, Harry said. Draco looked at him with an expression that Harry couldn't quite name, something between relief and something much more uncertain, the particular look of someone standing at the edge of a different way of being and not yet sure whether to step off. I should go, Draco said. All right. He stood, gathered himself, rebuilt enough of the composed Malfoy bearing to get down the corridor. At the end of the shelf he turned back. Potter, he said. Malfoy, Harry said. Next year, Draco said, and left the rest of it in the air between them. Harry watched him go and felt something settle. Next year, Draco had said, which was a commitment of a kind, an implicit acknowledgement that this was an ongoing conversation, not a finished one. He returned to his book. Term resumed and with it the particular productive momentum of people who have been thinking about things during the holiday and are ready to act on them. Hermione came back from her parents' house with 14 books she'd ordered specifically and a focused intensity that suggested she'd spent Christmas thinking hard about something. She told Harry within an hour of her arrival that she'd been researching soul magic independently and had questions. The 47, Harry said. Different 47, she said. More specific. They spent the first Saturday of term in the library from 9 in the morning until the castle decided it was dinner by going dark outside, working through what she'd compiled. She was systematic, she'd organized her questions in logical order, each one building on the previous answer, and Harry answered each one honestly, which meant the conversation went into territory that was unusual for a first-year library session. Ron sat at the end of the table and worked on Charm's homework and occasionally asked clarifying questions that were, without exception, either very funny or surprisingly perceptive. "So you've got his whole life in there," Ron said at one point. "Not his whole life," Harry said. "Fragments. Like, scattered pages from different chapters. Not continuous. But the important bits. The magic bits. Broadly, yes." Ron put his quill down. "You could probably, if you wanted, you could figure out pretty much anything. Spell, potion, whatever." He wasn't alarmed. He was thinking. "What's stopping you from just knowing everything?" "Time," Harry said. "And the difference between having knowledge and having skill. I know the theory of advanced transfiguration. That doesn't mean I can perform it yet. The body needs practice regardless of what the mind knows. But you'd get there faster than anyone else." "Yes," Harry said. "Probably." Ron nodded slowly. "And you're 11, he said." "Still yes." "Right." Ron picked his quill back up. "My dad is going to have a completely unreasonable reaction when I eventually tell him about you." "Is that a warning?" "It's a preview," Ron said. Hermione had her quill tapping against the table. "There's something I keep coming back to," she said. "Tell me," Harry said. "The soul fragments you've absorbed, they're not passive. They're integrated. You said it yourself, you've sorted them. Which means on some level they're part of your cognitive architecture now." She paused. "Does that mean any decision you make has passed through 7 different personalities? 7 different ways of experiencing the world?" Harry had thought about this. It was one of the things he'd written about in his first composition notebook, awkwardly at 7 years old and more precisely in the subsequent ones. "Not 7 different voices," he said. "More like, a larger context. It's like having read a very long history of something. The history informs how you think without making your decisions for you." "But Tom Riddle was brilliant, damaged, and afraid," Harry said. "Yes. His way of experiencing the world is part of that context. It's also the most clearly legible warning about what not to do that I could possibly have." He paused. "He's the best argument against his own approach." Hermione wrote something down. "I want to write a paper about this," she said. "You can't publish it," Harry said. "I know. It would be for me." She looked up. "And for you. If you wanted." Harry looked at her. "Why?" "Because someone should have it documented. Properly. What you are and how it works and why it hasn't made you terrible." She said this with a directness that was characteristic and a warmth underneath it that was specific to him. "Because you deserve to have someone thinking carefully about who you are." He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. The Quidditch match against Slytherin was on a Saturday in late January, the pitch iron cold and the sky the color of old pewter, and every student who wasn't sick or sensibly in bed was wrapped in scarves and stamping feet in the stands. Harry had learned to love Quidditch in the specific way that you love something that asks everything from you and returns it in a form you didn't expect. It was the only thing he did that was fully instinctive, where the accumulated knowledge and theory were completely irrelevant and the only thing that existed was speed and the cold air and the particular mathematics of motion that his body had learned independently of his mind. He went up at the start and went high, above the main play, and surveyed the pitch with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, calm, total, processing several things simultaneously. Slytherin played hard and technically excellent, their seeker, a 6th-year named Flint's cousin who had a name Harry hadn't bothered to retain, was faster than him on the turns. Harry let him be faster on the turns. He was better on the straights and better in the dive, and the snitch would determine the geometry. 20 minutes into the match, with Gryffindor down by 10 and the wind having shifted to come off the lake in long cold gusts, Harry spotted it. East stand, 15 feet above the crowd, hovering with the specific stillness of a thing that believes it hasn't been noticed. The Slytherin seeker saw him move and followed. They went for it together, both diving from height, closing the distance fast, and the Slytherin Seeker was good, genuinely good, pulling into Harry's slipstream to use the windbreak in closing the gap. Harry felt the approach and adjusted, not evasive, not competitive in the sense of trying to be first, just geometrically precise. He calculated the arc, adjusted his angle by 6 degrees, and took the snitch 2 feet before the other boy's hand arrived, snapping it out of the air with a clean certainty and pulling his broom level before the dive became problematic. The roar from the stands was a physical thing. He came back around to where Oliver Wood was hovering mid-pitch, and Wood's face was doing something that might have been the happiest he'd ever looked. "How?" Wood said. "Geometry," Harry said. "Geometry," Wood repeated, with the tone of a man who is going to be telling this story for some time. In the stands, Harry could see Ron standing on his seat with both arms in the air, and Hermione had her hands over her mouth in that way that meant she was either alarmed or delighted, and this time was clearly delighted, and Neville had apparently knocked his own hat off in the excitement and was sitting in the wrong seat because the crowd movement had shifted him. Harry landed to find himself immediately surrounded, which he navigated with the contained ease of someone who finds crowds manageable rather than overwhelming, accepting congratulations from teammates with genuine warmth and from the celebrating crowd with the pleasant serenity of someone who is happy for the moment without being consumed by it. Fred Weasley appeared at his shoulder. "Geometric," Fred said to George. "Mathematical," George confirmed. "We've been saying it since September." "Since September," George agreed. "The things we could do," Fred said, looking at Harry with the specific expression of a Weasley twin identifying an opportunity. "The partnerships available to us, no," Harry said. "He says no," George observed. "He says no now," Fred said. "He'll come round," they said together. Harry laughed, which he found happened more than he'd expected these days, and went to find Ron and Hermione. Snape began teaching him privately in February. This was not how it was framed. It was framed as detention, which Harry had received for arriving 3 minutes late to potions on a Tuesday because he'd been in a conversation with Flitwick that had run long and elected to finish rather than interrupt it, because the conversation had been about wand frequency modulation and was more immediately interesting than punctuality. "Detention, Potter," Snape had said, at the door. "Thursday evening. 7 o'clock. Of course, Harry had said, and arrived Thursday at 7 and found Snape in the classroom with 2 preparation stations laid out and ingredients arranged that had nothing to do with the first-year curriculum. They worked for 2 hours on a strengthening solution that was technically third-year work and in practice closer to fifth year in the way Snape approached it, not just the recipe but the theory beneath the recipe, the reasons each ingredient was sequenced as it was, the precise temperatures and what the molecular magic was doing at each stage. At no point was the word detention used again. By the 4th Thursday, Harry had understood that these sessions were what Snape had wanted since September, a place to engage with magic at the level it actually interested him, which was not 11-year-old curriculum level, using a student who could keep up. By the 6th Thursday, they were having actual arguments. "The temperature reduction before the final distillation isn't stylistic," Harry said. "It's load-bearing. The argument in borage is that you can maintain temperature throughout, but the evidence he cites isn't controlled for Castor variation, which you and I established is a real variable, which means his whole conclusion is suspect. Borage's framework is incomplete," Snape said, not wrong. "The distinction matters. If the framework doesn't account for a variable that demonstrably affects the outcome, in what sense is it not wrong?" Snape looked at him with the particular expression Harry had identified as meaning this is an excellent argument that I'm not going to concede without adequate resistance. "The output of the potion using Borage's method is still functionally effective across the documented range of Castor variation," he said. "At the extremes of that range, the reduction is significant enough to be clinically meaningful," Harry said. "In the documented cases of strengthening solution failure in the 1940s St. Mungo's audit, 40% of the failures were attributed to, I know the audit," Snape said. "Then you know Borage's framework doesn't explain it. The audit is incomplete." "Conveniently," Harry said. A pause. The dungeon was very quiet. The preparation station smelled of cedar and something astringent. "You," Snape said, are the most argumentative student I have had in 19 years of teaching. Is that not what you wanted? Harry said. Something moved in Snape's eyes. He looked away. Began cleaning his preparation surface with the controlled economy of someone who needs a moment to compose something. Your mother, Snape said, and this time he didn't stop himself, argued with me for 6 hours about the strengthening solution in our 4th year. She was wrong about 2 points and correct about 1 point I hadn't considered, and she did not let me forget the one she was right about for approximately 3 years. Harry went still. He let the silence have its shape. What was the point, he said. Snape looked up from the preparation surface. The role of the caster's intent in the distillation phase, he said. She argued it was statistically meaningful. I argued it was unquantifiable. She was right. A pause. I eventually published a paper in which I acknowledged it. I did not cite her. I have regretted that since 1978. The dungeon was very quiet. I'll cite her, Harry said. Snape looked at him. Whatever I publish, Harry said. Whenever I publish. Her name will be in it. He paused. Not as a memorial. As a credit. Snape set down his cleaning cloth. He said nothing for a very long moment. Clean up your station, he said, finally, in the voice he used when he was not going to say what he was actually feeling. Yes, Professor, Harry said. He cleaned up his station, and as he was leaving, Snape's voice came from behind him, the Argentinian text you mentioned. On compression brewing. I have a copy. It will be on the preparation table next Thursday. Harry stopped. Turned. Snape was facing the shelves, reorganizing something that didn't need reorganizing. Thank you, Harry said. He went upstairs. The letter from Nicholas Flamel arrived in March. It was 3 pages, written in an old man's handwriting, precise but with the slight tremor of age, the ink darker than modern standard, the parchment thick and personal. Harry read it twice in the window seat of the common room while snow fell outside. Flamel had written in French and Harry read it in French and was aware, absently, that he was reading it in French without translating it, which was another piece of Tom Riddle's inheritance that he'd stopped noticing. The old man wrote with the directness of someone who has lived long enough to have very little patience for unnecessary circumlocution. He had been prepared for the stone's destruction, he wrote. Dumbledore had spoken to him. He was not undamaged by this. 600 years of life created attachments that did not dissolve because you decided they should, but he was not, he wrote, afraid. He wrote, you asked me what I think, after 6 centuries of thinking about life and death. I will tell you what I think. I think that the soul which divides itself in pursuit of permanence has already lost what it was trying to keep. I think that a soul which gives itself entirely, which pours into another person so completely that it protects them from the darkest magic, has found the only permanence that actually exists. You are the proof of that argument, Mr. Potter. Your mother gave everything and it is still here, in you, in March of the year 1992, 664 years after I first started trying to escape the same equation she solved in a single moment. I will tell my wife. She will understand, I think, before I do. She has always been wiser about these things. Thank you for writing to me directly. Not many people would have. Harry folded the letter carefully and put it with the photograph from Christmas in the front of his notebook. He went to find Hermione and Ron. They were at the usual table, and when he sat down and looked at them, Ron with a chess problem laid out on the board, Hermione reading something dense with the quill tapping, he felt the thing that Flamel had described, though from the other side. Not the permanence you tried to engineer. The permanence that simply happened when you cared about something completely. Flamel wrote back, he said. Hermione looked up. And? He's all right, Harry said. He's all right. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her book and reached out and put her hand briefly on his arm, a small precise gesture that said everything she didn't need to say. Ron moved a knight. Mate in 4, he said, to neither of them in particular. Harry pulled out his notebook and uncapped his pen. Outside, snow continued to fall, and the castle held everything it held with the old patient warmth of a thing that has been doing this for a very long time, and the year turned slowly toward its end.